What if everything we know about ancient history is just the surface of a deeper, stranger truth? From lost tombs and uncracked codes to megalithic riddles carved into mountains, these aren't myths, they're real. Forgotten puzzles, forbidden blueprints, messages from the dead. This isn't just history, it's the world's most ancient unsolved crimes. And we're about to open the case file. Welcome to 30 Unsolved Ancient Mysteries, the secrets they left behind, and the questions that still haunt us. Before we dive into the deep end of history's greatest enigmas, hit that subscribe button if you love getting lost in the weird, the ancient, and the unexplained. And drop a comment, where in the world are you watching from, and what time is it right now? We're about to travel through time, so let's start by syncing up. The disappearance of the Indus Valley civilization. At the height of its power, the Indus Valley civilization stretched across more than 1 million square kilometers of what is now Pakistan, northwest India, and eastern Afghanistan. It was one of the world's earliest urban cultures, contemporary with Mesopotamia and ancient Egypt. It had everything you'd expect from a cradle of civilization: sprawling cities, complex drainage systems, standardized weights and measures, and a mysterious writing system that still refuses to be deciphered. And then, it vanished. There were no grand wars, no fiery cataclysms, no epic tales of kings falling and empires crumbling, just silence, slowly, like a candle burning down to its wick in a room full of people who didn't notice it was ever lit. Mohenjo-daro, Harappa, Dolaviranames, that once buzzed with the rhythms of life turned to ghost cities. Streets once crowded with merchants and artisans now lay buried under layers of earth and time. The people, the cities, the language they didn't transition, they evaporated. The enigma begins with their script. Hundreds of inscribed seals have been found, tiny tablets etched with animals, gods, and symbols. They're everywhere, but they say nothing. Or at least, nothing we can understand. Every attempt to decode them ends up stuck in a semantic cul-de-sac. No Rosetta Stone, no bilingual text. Just a wall of unknown symbols staring back like the universe's unread emails. The cities themselves are eerie in their precision. Mohenjo-daro had public baths, a grid-like city plan, and an advanced sewer system. Some houses even had indoor toilets connected to brick-lined drainage channels. Think about that. Indoor plumbing before the Romans. And then ask yourself, how does a society capable of that kind of infrastructure just forget how to civilization? Some say it was climate change. Around 1900 BCE, the monsoons that fed the rivers started acting up too little rain, too much heat. The Ghaggar Hakra River, once possibly a mighty channel of life, dried into a dusty skeleton. Crops failed. People moved. Maybe they just quietly scattered into the surrounding countryside, assimilating into other cultures like a whisper fading into a breeze. Others point to tectonic shifts. The region sits on active fault lines, and it's possible that earthquakes disrupted water sources and infrastructure. If your entire irrigation network suddenly crumbles because the earth yawns open beneath it, you've got a problem no amount of plumbing can fix. Then there's the Aryan invasion theory, once popular, now largely discredited narrative, that claimed Indo-European-speaking nomads from the north swept in around 1500 BCE, bringing the Vedas, horses, and hierarchies. But recent genetic and archaeological evidence suggests the decline of the Indus Valley preceded any large-scale migration. If anything, the so-called Aryans arrived long after the lights went out. So, the story fragments. Maybe it wasn't one cause. Maybe it was a symphony of slow, disastrous changing rivers, failing crops, social upheaval. Maybe the civilization didn't vanish. Maybe it just evolved, morphed into something else. Something that became the Vedic culture, the foundation of Hinduism, without leaving a forwarding address. But here's the thing. For all their engineering genius, the Indus people left no grand monuments. no towering ziggurats, no self-aggrandizing inscriptions. They were brilliant, organized, hygienic, and strangely modest. It's as if they built a whole civilization on the principle of no drama, and in the end, they disappeared as quietly as they lived. Which is, in a way, the most haunting part. We have their cities, their tools, their figurines, but we don't have them. Their thoughts, their voices, their gods, their fears. Their names? We don't even know what they called themselves. Just imagine that for a moment. The people who invented the flush toilet don't get remembered in their own words. We chase shadows on walls, piece together city maps from drone footage and satellite scans. Wonder why every house had a bathroom but no palace. Wonder why they seemed so egalitarian. Wonder why no one recorded the end. And maybe, just maybe, they were trying to tell us something in all those unreadable seals. Something like, nothing lasts forever. And now we're left with dust and bricks and a giant question mark. Every year, new digs in Pakistan and India uncover fresh ruins, but they answer nothing. They just widen the margins of the silence. The Indus Valley is not just a mystery, it's our mystery. A warning dressed in the ruins of a society that figured everything out, except how to survive. Which brings us to another civilization. One that allegedly built something beneath the land of the pyramids. Something more massive, more complex, and far more elusive. Herodotus saw it, but we still haven't. The lost labyrinth of Egypt. Herodotus wasn't a man given to understatement. When the father of history describes a monument as surpassing even the pyramids, you pay attention. In his 5th century BCE writings, he claimed to have seen, with his own eyes, a colossal underground complex near the city of Crocodilopolis. Yes, that was a real place. He called it the labyrinth, a sprawling, 2-level structure with 3,000 rooms, half above ground, half below, carved in stone and covered in hieroglyphs. Herodotus swore that no human words could do it justice, which is convenient because no modern archaeologist has ever conclusively found it. Let's get one thing clear. We're not talking about the mythical labyrinth of King Minos in Crete, one with the Minotaur. This one is real, or at least it should be. Located in Hawara, near the Fayum oasis, this Egyptian labyrinth was allegedly built by Pharaoh Amenemhat III in the 19th century BCE during the Middle Kingdom. Herodotus wasn't the only one to reference it. Strabo, Diodorus, Siculus, Pliny the Elder, they all describe it. And they're not talking about a small side chamber. This was an architectural beast. Strabo said it had as many courts as there were nomes, provinces, in Egypt. Think of it like a stone directory of the entire Egyptian nation. Only instead of listing names, it swallowed visitors whole. But here's the twist. No one knows where it is now. Napoleon's expedition to Egypt in the late 1700s didn't turn it up. Later 19th century excavations by Flinders Petrie at Hawara did find a few remain spillers, broken stone, a ruined temple, but nothing like the subterranean megacomplex the Greeks described. Nothing close to 3,000 rooms. Petrie even called it a fiasco. So what happened to the labyrinth? One theory is simple and depressing. It was cannibalized. Over the centuries, ancient builders reused old structures as convenient quarries. Need limestone? Just take it from that giant, already carved monument. The labyrinth might have been dismantled block by block, its bones carted away to feed other dreams. But that's not the only explanation. In 2008, a Belgian-Egyptian expedition called the Mataha Project scanned the area using ground-penetrating radar. Their findings? They detected huge anomalies beneath the surface, regular shapes, walls, chambers, something massive and man-made. And then, silence. The Egyptian authorities never approved further excavations. The team's report was buried faster than the labyrinth itself. Conspiracy theories sprouted like weeds. Some said the government was covering up a discovery that might rewrite history. Others whispered about secret chambers under the Sphinx, Atlantean connections, ancient aliens. You know, the usual. But forget the tinfoil for a second. Let's entertain a grounded possibility. Let's assume Herodotus wasn't completely hallucinating. If there is a lost labyrinth at Hawara, and it really does contain 3,000 rooms covered in inscriptions, then we're talking about a buried repository of Egyptian cosmology, politics, and theology, a lost archive potentially more important than the pyramids themselves. Think about it. This could be the ancient Library of Congress, sealed under desert dust. If half of what the Greeks said is true, the labyrinth was a kind of sacred database. Every nome had a court, every court had a chamber, and every chamber probably held statues, texts, relics, or coffins. In essence, a map of Egyptian civilization carved in stone. But why build it at Hawara? The region wasn't exactly Cairo 1.0, yet Amenemhat III chose to anchor his legacy there. He even built his pyramid nearby. The theory goes that the labyrinth was part mortuary complex, part administrative hub, part theological metaphor, a place where gods and bureaucracy intersected. And perhaps also a trap. Let's not forget the name, labyrinth, derived from labrys, the double axe, a maze, a place you enter but don't leave. Herodotus said visitors were strictly forbidden from entering the underground portion, which begs the question, what was down there? Treasure? Secrets? Ancient monsters? Maybe just records, documents, sacred texts, the kind of knowledge too powerful or too boring for the masses. In ancient Egypt, knowledge was a dangerous thing. Priests guarded it jealously. Magic and science blurred. Names had power. Words could create or destroy. And if this place was a literal labyrinth, then maybe it wasn't just a structure. Maybe it was a ritual journey. A maze of initiation. Each room, a trial. Each corridor, a rebirth. Or maybe it was just a bureaucracy's wet dream filing cabinets the size of football fields. We don't know. And until the Egyptian authorities allow real excavation, we might never know. The desert holds its secrets close. Beneath the dust and the sand, the labyrinth may still wait its halls intact, its walls etched with history, its silence deafening. We like to think we know the ancient world, that if something was truly incredible, surely we'd have found it by now. But Egypt keeps secrets like a sphinx, keeps riddles close to the chest, eyes unblinking. Which brings us to another mystery from the other side of the world. One with no walls, no doors, only stone jars scattered like ancient breadcrumbs. An open-air enigma that raises a question far weirder than, who built this? It asks, why would anyone? The plain of jars in Laos. Scattered across the wind-swept plateaus of central Laos, thousands of massive stone jars lie abandoned in quiet, eerie clusters. Some stand alone, others gather in groups like forgotten congregations. They litter the landscape in silence, as if dropped from the sky by titans who never came back for them. No inscriptions, no lids, no clue what they're doing there. This is the plain of jars, and it doesn't make sense. The jars are megalithicism, weigh over 10 tons, carved from solid stone. There are at least 90 jar sites, the largest of which, Site 1, contains over 300 of these mysterious monoliths. They vary in height and diameter, with the largest stretching more than 3 meters tall. They're not decorative. They're not positioned with any apparent astronomical purpose. They just sit there, quiet, heavy, ancient. Local legends say giants made them to brew rice wine after a victorious battle. Others believe they were used to collect monsoon rainwater for weary travelers. But archaeologists? They've got a darker theory. Between 500 BCE and 500 CE, the Iron Age people of this region may have used the jars in funerary rites. Human remains, burial goods, and ceramic fragments have been found nearby, leading many to believe the jars were once part of a complex death ritual. Perhaps bodies were placed in the jars to decompose before being cremated or buried. In essence, these jars weren't wine containers, they were coffins. But even that theory runs into problems. First, who were these people? We don't have a name for them. No written records, no cities, no temples, just the jars and a scattering of bones. Second, why go through the effort of carving and hauling these stone monstrosities only to leave them out in the open? There's no quarry nearby. That means each jar had to be dragged somehow across hills, through forests, over terrain that even modern trucks would struggle with. And third, why jars? Why not graves, or tombs, or burial mounds? There's a strange geometry to the whole thing. Some jars are arranged in circles, others in random scatterings. There are lids, possibly made from stone or wood, but most are missing. Some jars are broken, others are intact, and still others seem to have been abandoned mid-journey, like the world's most confusing game of hot potato. Then there's the war. During the 1960s and 70s, the Plain of Jars became a battlefield. As the US fought a shadow war in Laos against North Vietnamese supply lines, this ancient site got caught in the crossfire. Bombs rained down. Unexploded ordnance still litters the area today. Visiting many of the jar sites is impossible unless they've been cleared by UXO teams. In some places, ancient mystery meets modern horror in the form of rusted craters and warning signs. In a way, that makes the jars even more ghostly. Not just relics of the dead, but relics that survived the deadliest bombing campaign in human history. Still standing, still waiting. Despite decades of research, we've never fully cracked their purpose. Were they mortuary jars? Monuments? Storage devices? Sacred markers? And if it was a funerary practice, why is there so little consistency? Why are some jars empty, some partially buried, some cracked open like ancient eggs? And here's the bigger question. What kind of culture creates thousands of 10-ton stone jars and leaves behind no trace of itself? No writing, no artwork, no oral history that goes back that far. Just jars. If you ever visit, you'll notice something strange. It's not just the jars, it's the vibe. Something about standing among those ancient stones hits different. The silence is thick, the air feels older. You can almost hear the past breathing. If ghosts haunt places, then the Plain of Jars is their waiting room. Some say the area is cursed, others say it's blessed, but no one says it makes sense. Modern researchers use drones and 3D modeling to map the sites, trying to extract meaning from arrangement, composition, spatial relationships, but the answers remain stubbornly vague. Every hypothesis feels like it's missing a chapter from a book no one's ever read. The jars remain mute, their creators even more so. We're left with stone and speculation, like trying to reverse engineer a religion from the ruins of its altars. And here's a thought. What if the mystery is the message? Maybe the jars were meant to confuse, to provoke, to endure without explanation. Maybe they were ancient declarations of present artifacts saying, "We were here in the most permanent material available." Or maybe it's simpler. Maybe they were just garbage cans for dead bodies. An Iron Age take on biohazard containment. That's the thing about unsolved mysteries, they're only as poetic as we make them. But while we ponder that, let's pivot from jars to something even more cryptic. A disc. Not massive, not heavy, not intimidating, but one of the most debated, studied, and stubbornly unreadable objects in the ancient world. A riddle baked into clay, fired in time, and delivered from the heart of the Bronze Age like a cosmic postcard. It's time to spin the spiral. It's time for the Phaistos disc. The Phaistos disc. At first glance, it's just a clay disc. 6 inches wide, half an inch thick. something that looks like a kid's art project gone mildly wrong. But this isn't fridge magnet material. This is the Phaistos discossibly, the most tantalizing typo in human history. Unearthed in 1908 by Italian archaeologist Luigi Pernier in the ruins of the Minoan Palace at Phaistos, Crete, this baked disc has defied every attempt at translation, classification, or even replication. It sits in a glass case at the Heraklion Archaeological Museum, smug as hell, covered in symbols no one's ever seen anywhere else. There are 241 tokens stamped into both sides of the disc, arranged in a tight inward spiral. That's right-stamped, not carved, as in printed. Each symbol was pressed into the wet clay using individual stamps, suggesting the world's first movable type over 3,500 years ago. You heard that right. Move over, Gutenberg. The Minoans might have beaten you by 3 millennia. But we don't even know if it's a script. The symbols are bizarrely specific. There's a man in a headdress, a plumed helmet, a fish, an axe, a tulip-looking thing, a bell-shaped object, a human foot, all neatly arranged in rows that curl toward the center of the disc like some ancient hypnotic message. But what do they mean? That's the million drachma question. Linguists, cryptographers, and codebreakers have been clawing at this disc for over a century. The symbols aren't linear A, the known undeciphered Minoan script. They aren't linear B, which was cracked in the 1950s and turned out to be early Greek. There's something else. Something alien, a system of writing that appears nowhere else in the archaeological record. No duplicates, no Rosetta Stone, no help. Just a single disc. Some believe it's a hymn, others say a legal document, a prayer, a curse, a magical spell, a game board, a calendar, a recipe, a joke. Yes, seriously. Someone once proposed that the Phaistos disc is the ancient equivalent of a dad joke. But here's the academic drama. Some scholars don't even think it's real. The fact that it was found during a period of high-pressure excavations by Europeans desperate for a eureka moment has led some to suspect forgery. No other artifact like it has ever been found in Crete or anywhere else. Not one other stamp, not one other symbol on anything else. It's a linguistic Bigfoot, suspiciously singular. And yet, it feels ancient. The clay has been analyzed. The style seems consistent with Minoan craftsmanship. If it's a hoax, it's a really, really good one. The kind that takes a devious mind and a patient hand. Assuming it's real, the question becomes, who was it for? Because here's the kicker, the disc might not have been meant to be read at all. Not in the traditional sense. Some researchers think it could be musical notation, or mnemonic code, or a ceremonial object. Something designed to evoke meaning through symbol repetition rather than through traditional syntax. That's where it gets philosophical. Because maybe we're looking at this all wrong. Maybe the disc wasn't meant to be understood by use or even by the people who made it. Maybe it was performative. Maybe it was about the act of making it, not the content it held. Or maybe it's just a missing piece of a much bigger puzzle. One theory suggests that the disc is part of a now-lost tradition of stamping and printing in the Bronze Age. That once, there were shelves full of similar discs, each a sermon, spell, or shopping list. And this is just the lone survivor. The one clay pigeon that didn't get shattered, repurposed, or recycled into someone's goat fence. It's frustratingly perfect. Like the Mona Lisa with no background. It gives you just enough to think there's something there and then slams the door before you can prove it. Even modern tech can't crack it. AI, linguistic algorithms, frequency analysis, everything we've got, throws up its hands and goes, nope. The symbols repeat, sure, their structure, but not enough to suggest any known language family. It's like trying to translate a crossword puzzle written in emojis. Still, people try. Because the Phaistos disc dangles the possibility that history isn't linear, that complexity and innovation don't belong to timelines, but to moments. That one day, someone might have sat down in ancient Crete with a box of tiny stamps, a lump of clay, and an idea that made perfect sense to theme and zero sense to us. And maybe, just maybe, the disc was never lost. Maybe it's right where it was supposed to be. We're the ones who got lost. Because history isn't a straight line, it's a spiral, just like the disc. And sometimes we end up right where we started, only with more questions. And speaking of spirals and scripts no one can read, what happens when an entire civilization invents a writing system and buries it so deeply in isolation that even its own descendants forget what it means? Let's head to the loneliest corner of the Pacific, where another script waits on weathered wood, wrapped in mystery and fading fast. It's time for Rongorongo, the Rongorongo script of Easter Island. At the edge of the known world, on a speck of volcanic rock adrift in the vast Pacific, stands a forest of stone giants. You know the ones Moai, the brooding, oversized heads of Easter Island. Their mystery has become the stuff of legend, but the island's greatest enigma isn't made of stone. It's written on wood. Rongorongo, a script so rare, so elusive, it may be the only known writing system in the entire Pacific, a lost language born in isolation, now on the brink of permanent silence. Let's set the scene. Easter Island, or Rapa Nui, as the locals call Itis, about as remote as it gets, over 2,000 miles from the nearest continental landmass. You don't accidentally wash up there. You either navigated using stars and sheer audacity, or you were very, very lost. The people who settled it sometime between 800 and 1200 CE brought with them everything they needed to build a civilization: boats, tools, chickens, and oral tradition. Lots of oral tradition. Because that's how Polynesian cultures pass down knowledge through chants, stories, and songs. Which makes Rongorongo an anomaly, because it's writing. Real, actual writing, or at least, it looks like it. There are 26 known wooden objects inscribed with Rongorongo symbols. Tablets, staffs, birdman carvings, and a handful of fragments. The glyphs are carved in neat rows, using a style called Baustrophedon, meaning you read one line left to right, then the next right to left, and so on, like the path of an ox plowing a field. And the symbols? They're a trippy mix of humanoid figures, animals, plants, tools, geometric shapes. Some are crouching, some gesturing, some combined in ways that suggest syntax. This isn't random doodling, it's systematized, intentional, meaningful. But we have no idea what it says. There's no Rosetta Stone, no bilingual glossary, no spoken version, no living memory. By the time European missionaries arrived in the 19th century, the island's culture had been gutted by disease, slave raids, and internal collapse. The people who once knew how to read Rongorongo, if anyone truly did, were gone. Some accounts from the 1800s describe islanders chanting or singing as they touched the glyphs, but those reports are sketchy, romanticized, and possibly apocryphal. Others claim the tablets held genealogies, prayers, or incantations. One bishop in 1864 tried to collect them all for study only, to burn most of them, believing they were pagan idols. Yep, let that one sink in. The surviving tablets are scattered across museums in Chile, France, the US, and the Vatican. Some are heavily damaged. Others were used as firewood or tools before their significance was realized. What we have left is a jigsaw puzzle missing almost all the edge pieces. But here's the kicker. No other Polynesian culture developed a writing system. None. Rongorongo is completely unique in the region, and that raises a giant, flaming question mark. Where did it come from? One theory suggests it was inspired by early contact with European writing. Perhaps after seeing Latin script, the Rapa Nui people created their own symbolic system. The problem? Rongorongo appears to predate sustained European contact. And the sheer complexity of the glyphs, over 100 distinct symbols, some repeating in structured patterns, suggests it wasn't invented overnight. Another theory posits that Rongorongo is a remnant of a much older cultural inheritance, maybe brought by the first settlers from an unknown source, a lost transoceanic influence, an ancient literacy erased by time and waves. Or maybe it was a kind of proto-writing, like the symbols on the Phaistos disc or the Vin, a script more mnemonic than literal, a way to record chants or religious sequences, not language per se. Think of it as sacred notation, a memory palace carved in wood. The truth is, no one agrees, not even close. Linguists have tried frequency analysis. Statisticians have mapped glyph patterns. AI has scanned and categorized them. And still, the meaning evades us. Every hypothesis breaks down under the weight of insufficient data. Too few tablets, too little context, too much lost. And now time is the enemy. The wooden tablets are decaying. The island's oral traditions have been diluted by centuries of colonization and trauma. Each year, the chance of decipherment shrinks. We may be staring at one of the last scripts on Earth that will never be translated. A written language that will die unread. Which makes it oddly poetic. A civilization best known for its stone faces may have left its most human legacy in wood. Fragile, fleeting, almost invisible. Rongorongo reminds us that writing isn't just about permanence, it's about memory. And when memory fades, even writing becomes a whisper. But speaking of lost knowledge and impossible machines, what if I told you someone in ancient Greece built a mechanical computer? Something that could track the stars, predict eclipses, and even model planetary motion 2,000 years before Copernicus. And then forgot how. Get ready for gears, bronze, and mind-melting anachronisms. It's time for the Antikythera mechanism. The Sumerian king list. Imagine you're handed a document, an ancient manuscript, cracked and worn, etched in cuneiform on a clay tablet. It's a list, nothing fancy, just a record of kings. Names, cities, and the number of years they ruled. Dry stuff, right? Except the first king ruled for 28,800 years. That's not a typo. Welcome to the Sumerian king lista, baffling, otherworldly document from the world's first known civilization. It reads like the book of Genesis crossed with a royal resume, blending myth and monarchy, gods and humans, in a single, brain-melting chronology. Found in multiple versions across Mesopotamia, dating from as early as 2100 BCE, the king list presents a linear succession of rulers from before the Great Flood up to the reigns of real, historically verified kings. It starts in Eridu, the supposed first city of the world, and moves through names and dynasties like someone's trying to draw a timeline on a Mobius strip. Here's an excerpt, translated straight. When kingship descended from heaven, kingship was in Eridu. In Eridu, Alulim became king. He ruled for 28,800 years. Alagar ruled for 36,000 years. And it goes on like that. Tens of thousands of years of rule, city after city, until the flood comes. Yes, that flood and the kingship starts again, with slightly more believable numbers. So, what are we looking at? Is this a sacred myth? A political tool? A corrupted historical document? Or a coded message from the ancient world that says, time is not what you think it is? Let's dig in. The list was likely compiled in the city of Nippur, a religious hub in ancient Sumer. It was updated over time, each version tweaking names and reign lengths to reflect new dynastic propaganda. If your city was in charge, your kings got prime placement. History is written by the victor sand, also heavily edited by their scribes. But even with that in mind, the pre-flood kings are ridiculous. Alulim's 28,800 years, and Menluana's 43,200? Even Methuselah would side-eye those numbers. One theory is that these aren't meant to be taken literally. The inflated reigns could symbolize greatness or divine favor. Some scholars suggest they're numerical metaphors, reflecting sacred math tied to Sumerian cosmology. Numbers like 60 and 360 carry deep meaning in Mesopotamian thought, the same base 60 system that gave us 60 minutes and 360 degrees. Others argue the list reflects a dim memory of an actual prehistoric paste exaggerated through oral tradition until myth and fact melted together. What if there was an Alulim, but he ruled for 28 years, not 28,800? Multiply by 10, sprinkle some sacred math, and voila, history becomes legend. And then there's the flood. The king list describes a deluge that interrupts the line of succession. After the waters recede, a new set of kings rise zones with more realistic reigns, like 24 years, 36 years, 11 years. You know, human numbers. Sound familiar? The parallels to the biblical story of Noah are uncanny. A flood wipes the slate clean. Civilization begins anew. Even the city of Shuruppak, mentioned in the king list, is tied to Ziusudra, the Sumerian flood heresy Mesopotamian proto-Noah. Coincidence? Or shared cultural memory? Keep in mind, this text predates the Bible by well over 1,000 years. But even post-flood, the king list remains slippery. Some rulers are confirmed by archaeology like Gilgamesh, the semi-mythical king of Uruk, who also stars in the world's oldest epic. Others? Not so much. Entire dynasties may be fictional, political fabrications meant to validate a regime's divine right to rule. Still, the fact that this list exists at all is remarkable. The Sumerians weren't just inventing writing, they were inventing history. Linear time, bureaucracy, continuity. They were saying, this happened, and then this, and then this. They were building a ladder into the past even if the first few rungs are floating in a cloud of myth. And that's where the king list's true power lies. Not in its accuracy, but in its ambition. It dares to bridge the gap between gods and men, between eternity and empire. It starts in heaven and ends in the mud-brick streets of Sumer. It says, "We were divine once, now we're kings, but we remember." It's not a spreadsheet, it's a creation myth with bullet points. Modern scholars keep returning to it, not because it's reliable, but because it's revealing. It tells us what the Sumerians thought history should look like, ordained by gods, punctuated by catastrophe, and ruled by men chosen by fate. It also tells us something universal. Every civilization, no matter how advanced, eventually tries to make sense of time, and in doing so, it stretches the truth until it wraps around the world. So where does this leave us? With a list that begins in the divine, flows through the flood, and lands in the dusty hands of kings. A document that refuses to draw a hard line between legend and legacy. A reminder that the past isn't just what happened, it's what people believed happened. And, as we leave ancient Sumer behind, the question lingers, how many of our own histories will one day read like mythology? Now, let's step out of the Mesopotamian twilight and into a manuscript so strange, so utterly unreadable, it makes even the king list look like a grocery receipt. The drawings make no sense, the script matches no known language, and it's been driving codebreakers insane for over 600 years. Time to open the Voynich manuscript. The Voynich manuscript. It's 240 pages of pure confusion, handwritten in a looping, floral script no one can read, filled with illustrations that make less sense the longer you stare at them: naked nymphs bathing in interconnected green tubes, plants that don't exist, constellations that can't be named, and endless spirals that seem designed to hypnotize rather than inform. This is the Voynich manuscript, and it might be the most famous book that no one has ever read. Found in 1912 by rare book dealer Wilfrid Voynich in a Jesuit library in Italy. The manuscript is a linguistic UFO. Carbon dating places it in the early 1400s, but beyond that, the trail dissolves into speculation and scholarly despair. The script doesn't match any known alphabet. The language, if it's a language, has never appeared anywhere else, and every attempt to decode it has failed. Utterly. Let's start with the structure. The book appears to be divided into 6 sections. Herbal pages with drawings of fantastical plants labeled with text that gives 0 hints. Astronomical, zodiac-like diagrams, celestial charts, and an inexplicable love for naked star ladies. Balneological, think spas, but weird. Women wade through green goo, interconnected by what look like plumbing systems from a cyberpunk fever dream. Cosmological, spirals, concentric circles, diagrams that might represent otherworldly maps, or how to bake an interdimensional cake. Pharmaceutical, apothecary jars, and more plants, none of which exist in the real world. Recipes, long pages of continuous text with no illustrations, possibly spells, possibly soup. Every page is drenched in mystery. The script nicknamed Voynichese is fluid and consistent, written from left to right. It flows like a real language, obeying statistical patterns similar to natural human tongues. There are words that repeat, grammatical structures that seem to emerge, and yet it matches nothing. No Latin, no Greek, no Arabic, no known cipher, which is why it's attracted some of the best cryptographers in history, including those who broke Nazi codes. They failed. Alan Turing? Tried. Nada. The NSA? Gave it a crack during the Cold War. Still nothing. In recent years, AI has had a go. One algorithm suggested the text might be encoded Hebrew. Another guessed it was a medieval proto-Romance language. Yet no translation holds up. Every proposed breakthrough falls apart under scrutiny. So what are we dealing with here? There are several theories. Let's break them down. 1. It's a hoax. Maybe someone in the 15th century created a fake language to mess with scholars. A Renaissance troll job. But if so, it's one of the most elaborate deceptions in human history. The consistency of the script and its internal logic make a complete fake unlikely. 2. It's a cipher. Some believe it's a complex code hiding real language beneath layers of encryption. But no one's cracked the key. And what kind of code survives 6 centuries without slipping? 3. It's glossolalia. As in, it's gibberish, but sincere gibberish. A kind of automatic writing, like speaking in tongues. Maybe the author believed they were channeling divine or alien knowledge. 4. It's a lost language. A forgotten dialect, a one-person script, a last remnant of a culture that vanished without a trace. Romantic? Yes. Likely? Hard to say. 5. It's meaningful only in context. Some researchers believe the manuscript isn't meant to be read word for word. It could be visual notation part, memory palace, part ritual text, where meaning comes through performance or recitation. A tool for the initiated, not a book for the masses. And then there's the wildcard theory. It's from somewhere else. Somewhere. Not here. A fragment of a reality that branched off and curled in on itself. A book written by a people who don't exist in our timeline. Not aliens, necessarily just. Others. What's so maddening about the Voynich manuscript is that it feels meaningful. Every squiggle, every looping flourish, every whimsical plant feels intentional. It has the vibe of significance. And maybe that's the real trick. Maybe we're so desperate for meaning that we invent it. Humans can't stand a void. And that's what the Voynich manuscript is. A void dressed in vines and stars. A riddle that may never be solved. A mirror we keep trying to turn into a window. Even today, scholars, hobbyists, and YouTube codebreakers obsess over it. They build databases, track glyph frequency, compare symbol proximity. Every now and then someone screams, "Eureka!" on Reddit only, to disappear into the same spiral they thought they'd escaped. Because the truth is, the Voynich manuscript might never give up its secrets. It might be a cosmic joke. Or it might be the last echo of something beautiful, forgotten not because it failed, but because it succeeded in a world that didn't understand it. But let's pivot from the delicate loops of Voynichese to something rounder, heavier, realer. From unreadable text to perfectly smooth stone, from hidden meaning to unapologetic geometry. Let's head to Costa Rica. Time to roll into the mystery of the stone spheres. The stone spheres of Costa Rica. They lie scattered across the jungles, hills, and pastures of southern Costa Rica, hundreds of perfectly round stone balls, some as small as a grapefruit, others the size of a car. Silent, imposing, impossibly smooth. They look like ancient cannonballs abandoned by giants, or the remnants of some cosmic billiard game gone wildly off table. These are the Diki spheres, over 300 of them discovered so far. And no one knows who made them, how they were carved so precisely, or what they were ever supposed to do. First reported in the 1930s by workers clearing banana plantations for the United Fruit Company, the spheres immediately caught attention. They were unlike anything else in the region, massive, symmetrical, and eerily artificial in a land of jungle overgrowth and pre-Columbian ruins. Some were clustered in groups. Others appeared in lines, triangles, or random configurations. Most were made from granodiorite, heavy, igneous rock not always found nearby. That means many of them had to be hauled over long distances. And this is where the mystery deepens. How do you shape a 16-ton rock into a perfect sphere without iron tools, wheels, or pulleys? The culture behind the spheres, believed to be the extinct Dikis, people left no written language, no blueprints, no murals of stonework in progress. They didn't even leave behind the chisels. We're talking about master craftsmanship with zero receipts. Some scientists suggest the stones were shaped by hammering smaller rocks against larger boulders for hours, weeks, months. Others believe they were roughly shaped and then polished using sand. If true, that would have taken not just patience, but a level of dedication that defies modern attention spans. Imagine spending a year pounding a rock just to make it round. For what? That's the black hole at the center of this mystery. We don't know. There are no clear religious markings, no astronomical alignments that hold up to scrutiny. Some spheres were found at burial sites. Others were placed at the entrances of settlements. Some might have been status symbols, ancient lawn ornaments for the elite. Others could have marked tribal territories, served ceremonial purposes, or even been used in rituals we can't begin to guess at. Then came the damage. When the spheres were first discovered, they weren't treated as sacred relics. Workers rolled them with bulldozers. Farmers blew them up with dynamite, hoping for gold hidden inside. Many were moved from their original positions, stripped of context, scattered to museums, universities, and government buildings across the country. What might have once been a grand architectural message was reduced to decorative curios. And so, the puzzle got harder. Some spheres remain buried. Others sit neglected in overgrown pastures. Without maps of their original locations, it's nearly impossible to reconstruct their cultural role. And the Dikis people? They were wiped out long before Europeans even set foot in Costa Rica, destroyed by disease, colonization, and the inevitable decay of time. Today, The spheres are Costa Rica's most iconic archaeological symbols. They even appear in passports. In 2014, 4 archaeological sites containing these stones were designated UNESCO World Heritage Sites. That recognition, though, hasn't brought clarity, just more respectful confusion. Then there are the fringe theories. Atlantis, aliens, ancient power generators. Some say the spheres encode a prehistoric star map. Others believe they were sonic tools meant to resonate with Earth's natural frequencies. The usual suspects emerge whenever ancient humans make something impressive. The idea that they couldn't have done it on their own. But the more compelling theory is that the Diki's people did make them, and that we, standing centuries later in the rubble of lost context, simply don't understand the logic behind the perfection. Because the spheres are perfect. Measurements show some have less than 1% deviation from a true sphere. No lopsidedness, no wobble, just quiet mathematical beauty. It's the kind of symmetry that speaks to something more than practicality. These weren't tools, they were statements. But what were they saying? Were they funerary icons? Celestial models? Territorial markers? Or were they something more philosophical, a way for the Dikis to impose order on a chaotic world? A way to say, we mastered this, we shaped the unshapeable, we made the world round on purpose. Maybe the mystery is the message. In an age where we explain everything, where even the sky is mapped and the genome is coded, there's something sacred about a giant rock no one can explain. The spheres are relics from a time when human ambition outpaced its footprint, when the monumental wasn't about utility, but meaning. They don't tell us what the Dikis believed, but they make us believe there's something left to discover. And speaking of lost meaning baked into bizarre geometry, let's pivot from jungle spheres to underwater anomalies. Let's move from the stony silence of Costa Rica to the carved silence of southern China, where vast man-made caves wait in darkness, dug with purpose, but with no purpose we can name. Enter the Longyou Caves. The Longyou Caves in China. In 1992, a farmer in the Zhejiang province of China decided to do something simple: drain a pond. He figured there might be fish, or at least some usable land beneath the murky surface. Instead, what he found was a staircase, then another, then a doorway. And then he walked into a chamber unlike anything anyone had ever seen. What he discovered wasn't a natural cave, it was carved. Every surface walls, ceilings, pillars meticulously chiseled by human hands. He'd stumbled upon one of the most bizarre and haunting archaeological discoveries of the modern age: the Longyou Caves. At last count, there are 24 of these caves, all within a single square kilometer. Each is enormous. Some are over 30 meters tall, with ceilings high enough to make cathedrals blush. They're carved into solid sandstone, with smooth, right-angled corners and massive internal pillars left intact to support the structure. And here's the kicker: there are no tool marks that suggest modern equipment, just rows and rows of tight, uniform chisel marks, all angled the same way, as if done by hand with monastic precision. There are no records of them. None. No ancient texts. No mentions in local folklore. No builder's name etched into a corner. It's as if someone spent a decade digging the world's most careful basement complex, and then just forgot it existed. Historians estimate that each cave would have required the removal of thousands of tons of rock by hand. Conservatively, that's hundreds of people working non-stop for years, and yet the caves remain unconnected. Each one is isolated from the others, separated by walls of untouched rock just meters thick. Which begs the question, why? There are no signs that these caves were used for living. No soot from fires, no altars or shrines, no storage pits, no evidence of tools, pottery, or daily use. Just emptiness. Beautiful, maddening emptiness. Some theories try to impose structure onto the void. Storage chambers? Seems inefficient. Digging an Olympic-sized warehouse into stone when a wooden barn would do? Unlikely. Tombs? There are no burials, no bones, no funerary goods. Military bunkers? Nothing indicates defensive planning. No narrow choke points, no escape tunnels, no signs of occupation. Flood shelters? Possibly. But why make them so ornate? Why leave no indication of water systems or drainage? Then there's the detail that haunts every researcher who walks those echoing halls. The pattern. Every wall is covered in the same distinct diagonal chisel marks, perfect rows, like someone painted the rock with a comb. The pattern is consistent across every cave, identical, almost mechanical, like a language written in stone that we've forgotten how to read. Was it symbolic, ritualistic, or simply aesthetic? It's that last theory that's most unsettling. That some culture dug these chambers not for practical reasons, not for survival or storage or worship, but for art. Monumental, secret art. Art no one would ever see. Art carved into the bowels of the earth, and then abandoned without explanation. There are even stranger theories. Some believe the caves are remnants of an ancient, now lost civilization, a pre-Qin dynasty society that left no trace beyond its architecture. Others suggest extraterrestrial influence, because of course they do. The precision, the scale, the silence, it all feeds into that timeless itch that says, this doesn't fit the timeline. But the real fear? The one no one wants to say out loud? What if we just forgot how to do this? What if a civilization existed right under the nose of history that could mobilize labor, organize engineering, and execute a project of this scale without ever writing it down? What if we're the ones who've regressed? Think about it. These caves are over 2,000 years old. They've withstood earthquakes, erosion, and war. Meanwhile, we build strip malls that collapse after 15. The Longyou caves whisper a brutal truth. Durability is not always progress. And here's the final twist of all 24 caves. Not one has collapsed. Not a single ceiling has caved in. The builders knew what they were doing. So we're left with one of the greatest architectural mysteries in human history. Monumental spaces cut from stone, perfectly preserved, devoid of function or meaning, sealed in silence. An entire underground complex that screams intention and gives us nothing else. It's as if someone wanted to prove they could shape the earth hand, then walked away. The Uffington White Horse. High on a windswept chalk hill in southern England, etched into the earth like a tribal tattoo on the skin of time, gallops a horse. A ghostly, abstract figure, 90 meters long, stark white against the green its body made of bold geometric lines and sweeping curves. It's not natural erosion. It's not accidental. Someone carved it. On purpose. And they did it over 3,000 years ago. Welcome to the Uffington White Horse. A prehistoric geoglyph that's been watching over the Oxfordshire landscape since the late Bronze Age or earlier. It's not just old. It's timeless. It refuses to be dated precisely, defined neatly, or decoded fully. And the deeper you dig, the more it gallops out of reach. The first thing to understand is how it was made. Unlike other hill figures, which are often surface level, the Uffington horse was cut deep into the turf, exposing the white chalk underneath. To keep the image sharp, generations of people had to scour it, trimming vegetation and adding chalk regularly. If they stopped, the horse would fade. The hillside would reclaim it. And that's exactly what makes it so eerie. They didn't stop. For centuries, maybe millennia, locals returned to this hill and maintained the horse. Like it was sacred. Like it mattered. Like they were protecting something that had outlived memory itself. Because no one remembers why it was made. There are no texts, no myths that explain it directly. just whispers, speculation, theories that ride the line between poetic and absurd. Some believe it was a tribal symbol and emblem of identity carved so the gods, or the enemies, or the skies would know whose land this was. Others say it's a solar symbol, that the horse was tied to sun worship, its sleek body mimicking the arc of the sun across the sky. There's even the wild idea that it's not a horse at all. Look closely, and the creature's abstract shape could also resemble a dragon or a large feline. The oldest legends of the area talk about a great battle with a dragon atop the hill, and some claim the white horse is its skeleton, eternally visible. Others say it's a symbol of Eponathi, Celtic goddess of horses, fertility and protection. But here's the best part. It's still here. Unlike the Nazca lines, which were hidden from view for centuries and only became famous in the age of aerial photography, the Uffington horse was always visible, always watching, always known. It's been a fixture in local life for thousands of years, appearing on maps, inspiring poems, even showing up in local festivals. And yet, we know almost nothing about it. It doesn't match the other white horses cut into England's hillsides, most of which date from the 18th and 19th centuries. Those are showy, decorative, and obvious. The Uffington figure is something else entirely abstract, angular, modern-looking. It almost resembles minimalist art. Some even say it looks like Picasso sketched it during a fever dream. That's how ahead of its time it is. That weird abstraction has led some scholars to propose that the horse wasn't meant to be seen from the ground at all. Like the Nazca lines, perhaps it was meant to be seen from above. But from above by whom? This wasn't a culture with hot air balloons or helicopters. So who were they showing it to? The gods? The stars? The future? Because it did reach the future, and we're still trying to understand it. In the 1990s, archaeologists used optical dating techniques to estimate the age of the Uffington horse. The results placed it firmly in the late Bronze Age, or early Iron Age, between 1,380 and 550 BCE. That makes it one of the oldest geoglyphs in the world. And yet it survived everything: erosion, conquest, Christianity, industrialization. Through Saxons, Normans, plagues, and empires, the horse remained, maintained, revered. To this day, volunteers gather to scour the horse just like their ancestors did. They clean the lines, tamp down new chalk, and preserve the figure. Not because they know what it means, but because they feel it does. That's the real power of the Uffington white horse. It taps into something primal. It's not just a symbol, it's a presence, a spirit carved into the earth, a message from people who left no words, only this blazing white silhouette galloping forever across the hillside. And while we may never decipher its purpose, we get it. Deep down, we recognize the need to mark the land, to leave something behind, to shout into the void of time, we were here, and we understood beauty. So what's next? Well, the Uffington horse has stood exposed to the elements for over 3,000 years, and it still makes more sense than what some people claim is hidden under the sands of Egypt. Not above ground, not in plain sight, but underneath. A monument within a monument. A riddle buried beneath the world's most famous riddle. Prepare yourself. It's time for the Sphinx water erosion hypothesis. The Sphinx water erosion hypothesis. It's one of the most iconic faces in history. Towering above the Giza Plateau, its stoic expression frozen for millennia, the Great Sphinx of Egypt is equal parts monument and mystery. Half lion, half pharaoh, it stares eternally toward the rising sun as if daring time itself to blink first. But beneath that calm gaze, a storm brews. Because some researchers believe the Sphinx isn't just old, it's much older than we've been told. Older than Khafre, older than the pyramids, maybe older than written history itself. And the evidence? Rain. This is the Sphinx water erosion hypothesis, and it might just be the archaeological conspiracy that cracked the timeline of civilization. Let's set the stage. Mainstream Egyptology dates the Sphinx to around 2500 BCE, during the reign of Pharaoh Khafre. That theory is mostly built on proximity. The Sphinx sits near Khafre's pyramid, and some think the face resembles statues of him. Case closed. Except, geology has questions. In the 1990s, geologist Dr. Robert Schoch from Boston University dropped a bombshell. After studying the Sphinx's enclosure, the hollow in which it sits, noticed something strange. The rock walls weren't weathered the way you'd expect from 4,500 years of desert exposure. The erosion patterns didn't scream sand and wind. They whispered, rain. Heavy, sustained rainfall. That's a problem, because Giza hasn't seen that kind of rainfall since around 7,000, 5,000 BCE. Some estimates push it even further back into the end of the last ice age, circa 10,000 BCE. If Schoch's theory is correct, it means the Sphinx was carved not in the era of pharaohs and dynasties, but in a time before agriculture, cities, or even pottery. In short, someone made the Sphinx when human beings were still figuring out farming. Cue the chaos. Mainstream scholars were less than thrilled. Egyptologists argued the weathering was due to salt crystal exfoliation or subsurface water. Others said that even if rain did cause the erosion, it could have happened in the early dynastic period still within the traditional timeline. But Schoch wasn't alone. Independent researchers like John Anthony West and later, alternative theorists like Graham Hancock picked up the thread. They pointed to the Sphinx's disproportionately small head, possibly recarved from an older lion-shaped monument. They noted the weathered core body versus the relatively intact temples nearby. They asked, what if the Sphinx was already ancient when the pyramids were built? What if Egypt inherited it? And if that's true, who built it? That's where the speculation goes off the rails. Some say a lost advanced civilization, Atlantis, Lemuria, take your pick, carved the Sphinx in a forgotten golden age. Others invoke extraterrestrial architects. The most grounded version posits a pre-dynastic culture with unknown capabilities. All versions shake the foundation of human history. Because the implications are huge. If the Sphinx is 9,000 or even 12,000 years old, then the timeline of civilization doesn't just shift, it explodes. It suggests that complex monument-building societies existed long before Mesopotamia or the Nile Valley were even getting started. And it's not just the erosion. There's the so-called Inventory Stela, a 26th dynasty artifact that claims the Sphinx existed during the reign of Khufu's father before Khafre. It's not definitive, and it could be propaganda, but it's a crack in the narrative. Then there's the layout. The Sphinx, the pyramids, and other monuments at Giza form geometric relationships some claim align with celestial events like Orion's belt circa 10,500 BCE. Coincidence? Or memory encoded in stone? Skeptics say this is all pareidolia, seeing patterns where none exist, that the erosion could be explained by natural salt weathering. That alternative theorists are cherry-picking data to support pseudoscientific claims. And maybe they are. But here's the thing. The Sphinx shouldn't still exist. Erosion, wind, vandalism, time it should be rubble. But it's not. It endures. Mutilated, yes, its nose and beard gone, its body patched and worn, but still there. Still watching. And maybe that's the point. Maybe the Sphinx is less about answers and more about the questions it forces us to ask. How much do we really know about human history? What might we have lost or never known at all? Because the real story of the Sphinx may not be in what we see, but in what's missing. The erased names, the undocumented eras, the civilizations that left no bones, no books, just stone. So we stare back at it, across the millennia, and it stares right through us, silent, knowing, unmoved. But if that stony enigma hides its secrets beneath layers of rock and myth, the next mystery is even deeper, buried under a mountain and riddled with metallic veins that defy logic, science, and explanation. Next stop, the Bailong Pipes. The Bailong Pipes in China. In the remote deserts of western China, at the foot of a windswept mountain called Bailong, there's a cave. It's not on any tourist trail. You won't find gift shops or glossy brochures. But deep inside this rugged, silent hill lies a mystery that shouldn't exist. Rows of corroded metallic pipes embedded in solid stone. They don't belong there, and no one can explain them. These are the Bailong Pipes, ancient conduits that pierce through rock like the plumbing of a forgotten machine. Some protrude from cave walls, others jut from the nearby shores of a dried-up salt lake. They vary in diameter from a few inches to microscopic, but they all share the same impossible characteristic. They appear to be old, very old. Local legends spoke of the cave long before science showed up. They called it the Mountain Palace of the Gods. That was before modern attention fell on the site in the early 2000s, when a team of Chinese researchers arrived to analyze the pipes. What they found only made things stranger. Chemical analysis showed that many of the pipes were composed of iron oxide, silica, and calcium materials consistent with extremely old metalwork. But around 8% of the material was unidentifiable. Not iron, not steel, not anything common in ancient metallurgy. Worse, or better, depending on how weird you like your archaeology, some pipes had tree rings in their cross-sections, as if organic material had slowly petrified into iron. Cue the chaos. One theory is that the pipes are the remains of a long-lost industrial site, perhaps prehistoric iron smelting by an unknown people. But there's no evidence of habitation, no tools, no kilns, no artifacts. Just pipes. Another theory? They're natural formations, fossilized tree roots, or mineral veins that just look artificial. It's a compelling idea, and nature can be weirder than fiction. But then you have the geometry. Straight lines, right angles, pipe networks branching off with suspicious regularity. Nature doesn't usually do plumbing. Then there are the pipes beneath Lake Tosin, just a few hundred meters away. Buried in the mud, they stretch out like forgotten infrastructure. No one's excavated them fully. No one knows how far they go, or how deep, or why they're there. So the theories escalate. Some say it's the remains of an ancient civilization, prehistoric engineers who once colonized the region before disappearing into myth. Others claim alien technology. That Bailong Mountain was once an extraterrestrial outpost, and the pipes are leftovers of some interstellar experiment. It sounds ridiculous, until you realize how little we understand. This part of China, Qinghai province, is vast, barren, and largely unexplored. For centuries, it was a void on the map. If someone wanted to bury a secret, this would be the place to do it. Yet, the Chinese government, usually silent on fringe archaeology, actually acknowledged the Bailong pipes in 2002. They sent a team of scientists to investigate and erected a large sign at the site that read, "The Bailong Pipes, a World Wonder." And then, silence. No follow-up expeditions, no detailed public reports. The cave is now off-limits to tourists, fenced off and guarded. Theories flourish in the absence of facts. And the pipes remain rusted, silent, sealed in stone. So what are they? Man-made relics from a lost civilization? Natural oddities that resemble ancient tech? Or something else entirely? Something we don't yet have the framework to explain. The Bailong pipes don't offer answers. They offer discomfort. A humbling reminder that there are still things on this earth we don't understand. That beneath the layers of geology and time, there might be fingerprints not human, not modern, waiting to be found. And while the desert wind howls through the cave mouth, the pipes hold their silence. But if you think ancient mystery ends in barren wastelands and rusty relics, think again. Our next stop is a tomb the grandest, most dangerous, and most deliberately unexplored in the world. Buried beneath a pyramid, guarded by Mercury, shrouded in legend. It's time to enter the tomb of Qin Shi Huang. The tomb of Qin Shi Huang. Somewhere beneath a man-made hill in central China, surrounded by fields of stone soldiers and rivers of poisoned earth, lies the tomb of Qin Shi Huang, first emperor of a unified China. His mausoleum is said to rival the pyramids in scale and surpass them in secrecy, because unlike the pyramids, no one has ever opened this one. Not really. They haven't dared. Let's rewind. In 1974, a group of farmers near Xi'an were digging a well when they unearthed something strange, life-sized clay heads. Archaeologists moved in, and what they uncovered would become one of the greatest archaeological finds of the 20th century, the Terracotta Army. Thousands of warriors, horses, chariots, each unique, arranged in precise battle formations built to defend the emperor in the afterlife. And they were just the doormen. The army is positioned around a massive earthen mound, Mount Li, where Qin Shi Huang's actual tomb lies untouched. The historical record, mainly from ancient historian Sima Qian, paints a picture of staggering ambition, a subterranean palace, complete with rivers of flowing mercury, ceilings encrusted with pearls to mimic the stars, and mechanical traps designed to kill any intruder. It sounds like something out of Indiana Jones, and that's not a coincidence, because no one has verified it. Why? Simple. They're scared. Not of curses or ghosts, of mercury, of collapse, of cultural vandalism. The tomb is fragile. The technology to excavate it safely doesn't exist yet. The Chinese government has adopted a rare policy of archaeological restraint. Leave it be. Better to let it sleep in darkness than to risk destroying what might be the most intact ancient tomb ever discovered. But the mystery taunts us. The layout of the Terracotta Army itself seems strategic, facing east, as if guarding against enemies from the emperor's past. Each soldier is a work of art. Different hairstyles, facial features, even expressions. It's not a mass production job. It's a symphony of craftsmanship. And it was just the beginning. Sima Qian's writings describe a tomb more elaborate than anything in known Chinese history. According to him, mercury rivers flowed mechanically through the chamber, powered by primitive pumps. Traps, crossbows, and spring-loaded mechanisms were rigged to fire upon trespassers. The whole thing was designed to replicate the known world in miniature, a cosmos buried underground, all for one man. And what a man! Qin Shi Huang was not your average ruler. He conquered and unified the warring states of China in 221 BCE, standardizing currency, weights, and even script. He built massive roads, started the Great Wall, hunted for immortality. He was a tyrant, a visionary, a myth-maker. His tomb reflects that blend of paranoia and god complex. And the mercury? That's not just poetic license. Modern surveys have confirmed unusually high levels of mercury in the soil around the tomb mound, far beyond what should naturally occur. This lends chilling credibility to the ancient account. If there are rivers of mercury inside, that would make the tomb not just dangerous, but a sealed, toxic time capsule. No cameras, no drones, no probes. The tomb is off limits. We can only guess what lies within. Perhaps the greatest untouched royal burial in history. Perhaps the emperor's mummified body seated on a throne of jade, staring eternally into a replica universe. Perhaps nothing. Perhaps a booby-trapped void. The idea that a structure so enormous, so elaborately engineered, remains sealed in the 21st century is staggering. We've mapped the stars, walked on the moon, split the atom, and we still don't know what's under that mound in Xi'an, because the risk is too high. It's a modern paradox. We have the ability to destroy what we want to discover. The paint on the terracotta warriors began to flake off within minutes of exposure to air. What horrors would excavation unleash inside the tomb? Collapse, poison, decay? Once opened, it cannot be unopened. So the tomb waits. A perfect Schrodinger's sarcophagus. We know it exists. We know it's real. But until we crack it opener, develop the tech to see without touching it, remains both the most extraordinary archaeological find and the most carefully avoided. It's a story that flips the usual script. Most ancient mysteries were lost to time. This one, time still holds it tightly. And as Qin Shi Huang lies buried beneath his artificial mountain, flanked by his silent army, we must turn to another mystery from ancient Egypt. One with a carving that has sparked decades of debate. One that may or may not be a light bulb glowing from the past. It's time to switch on the enigma of the Dendera light. The Dendera light. Inside the Temple of Hathor at Dendera, Egypt, past hieroglyph-lined halls and under ceilings painted with stars, lies a stone relief that has fueled decades of speculation, pseudoscience, and more than a few YouTube rabbit holes. It depicts a strange scene. A serpent coiled inside what looks like a large bulbous object, connected to a base with stalk-like appendages. In one version, the bulb is being supported by a pillar. In another, it's held aloft by figures. Some interpretations call it a lotus flower. Others, a blossoming banana. But to a particular subset of the internet and a few fringe historians, it's something far more electrifying. They call it the Dendera light. The theory is simple, wild, and oddly compelling. Ancient Egyptians may have had some form of electrical technology. The relief looks at least vaguely like a modern incandescent bulb. The snake becomes the filament. The bulb's shape resembles a Crookes tube or cathode ray tube. The pillar is a jada associated with stability, but here, possibly repurposed as an insulator. Nearby is a figure holding what looks like a cable. Coincidence? Or forbidden science? Mainstream Egyptologists will stop you right there. They interpret the carving in symbolic terms. The serpent represents the god Harsomptis, emerging from the lotus flower, a symbol of creation. The jade pillar is standard Egyptian iconography, representing Osiris's backbone and spiritual strength. So why the confusion? Because the scene is weirdly modern, out of place, a sculptural non sequitur in an otherwise mythological narrative. And unlike most temple art, this one has almost no accompanying text. No clarifying inscriptions, no obvious explanation. It's just there. And it's not alone. The Dendera temple complex has long been fertile ground for esoteric speculation. Built during the late Ptolemaic period, roughly 225 BCE to 50 BCE, it contains a mix of Greek and Egyptian religious elements, astronomical charts, zodiac ceilings, and a kind of cosmological stew that blurs the lines between science and myth, which is exactly where the Dendera light lives, between symbol and function. Proponents of the electric hypothesis ask the obvious question: if the Egyptians had electricity, where are the wires? The generators? The sockets? Some reply with more speculation. Perhaps such knowledge was limited to the priesthood. Perhaps the power source was hidden, or simply didn't survive. Others cite the Baghdad battery, another controversial artifact, as possible evidence of ancient electrochemistry. Still others bring in the ancient alien playbook, arguing that this knowledge was gifted or rediscovered from a forgotten high civilization. There's no hard proof, just the carving, just the eerie resemblance. But still, the question flickers. Why does it look so much like a light bulb? Here's where things get psychological. Human brains are wired for pattern recognition. We see faces in clouds, animals in constellations, meaning in noise. So when we see a snake inside a tube, we map that onto what we know, glass bulbs, vacuum tubes, fluorescent lamps, but that doesn't make it real. Or does it? Some theorists argue we've been conditioned to view ancient civilizations as inherently primitive, that we've boxed them in with timelines and assumptions. But what if we're wrong? What if knowledge comes in waves? Lost, rediscovered, relost again? The Dendera light becomes less of an outlier and more of a glimpse through a crack in history's facade. That's the seductive power of this mystery. It doesn't demand belief. It simply asks, what if? What if the past isn't a staircase, but a spiral? What if the Egyptians had forms of power, light, and science that left no trace in textbooks, only in stone? And that leads us to another relica-corroded clay jug conundrum that also seems to suggest electricity long before Edison, not in Egypt, but in Iraq, hidden in plain sight among the ruins of ancient Mesopotamia. It's time to plug into the riddle of the Baghdad Battery. The Baghdad Battery. In the basement of the National Museum of Iraq, buried among the relics of one of the world's oldest civilizations, sits an artifact that shouldn't exist. It doesn't glitter like a royal headdress. It doesn't roar like a lion statue. It doesn't even look particularly ancient. It looks like a used piece of plumbing, a clay jar, about 6 inches tall, sealed with asphalt, and containing an iron rod encased in a copper cylinder. Not impressive until you realize it may have been an ancient battery. This is the so-called Baghdad Battery. Discovered in the 1930s in Kujat Rabu, a village near modern-day Baghdad, the artifact dates roughly to the Parthian or Sassanid periods, somewhere between 250 BCE and 250 CE. That's over 1,500 years before the official invention of the voltaic cell. And yet, the structure is eerily familiar to any high school physics student. 2 dissimilar metals, separated by an acidic medium, possibly vinegar or wine, capable of generating a small electrical charge. If you filled it up, in theory, it would work. Which begs the obvious question, why the hell would ancient Mesopotamians need a battery? This isn't an easy question, because if the Baghdad Battery is what it seems, it rewrites everything we think we know about ancient technology. If it's not, then we've been duped by a coincidence of construction. Let's walk the line. The battery hypothesis was popularized by Wilhelm Koenig, an Austrian archaeologist who worked at the museum. He proposed that the device could have been used for electroplating coating a metal surface with a thin layer of another, like gold or silver. Some ancient objects do have incredibly thin, uniform metal coatings that would be hard to explain with just fire and hammer. But there's a problem. No electroplating equipment has been found. No wires, no tools, no residue, no written instructions, just the jar. Skeptics argue it's not a battery at all, that it may have been a storage vessel for scrolls, or a kind of religious totem, or a medicine container, that the copper and iron were never meant to touch anything acidic, just parts that ended up in the same jar through some ancient version of junk drawer entropy. And they're not wrong to be cautious. It's one artifact, one data point, and science hates conclusions without replication. Still, the idea lingers, because even if it wasn't a functioning battery, the design is just so suggestive. It wants to be a battery. And that's where the story gets philosophical. Maybe the Baghdad Battery wasn't used the way we'd use a battery. Maybe it wasn't powering lights or electroplating jewelry. Maybe it was part of something else, something religious, ritualistic, symbolic. Maybe a priest touched the top and felt a tingle, and people called it divine, a holy jar that sparked like the gods. Because electricity, to someone in 200 BCE, would have been indistinguishable from magic. And there's something haunting about this idea that ancient people might have brushed up against technologies they didn't fully understand, that they made devices not out of utility, but out of awe, that they stumbled into science sideways. If the Baghdad battery is real, it doesn't prove the ancients had smartphones or space lasers. But it does suggest they were tinkerers, experimenters, and that their curiosity might have pushed them further than we assumed. And maybe, just maybe, they forgot what they discovered. Because knowledge isn't linear. It's fragile. It gets lost, buried, burned, rewritten. Sometimes all that remains is a clay jar, a copper tube, and an iron rod waiting for someone thousands of years later to say, "Wait, what is this?" And that brings us to another ancient puzzle made of stone, not metal, one that peers not into the mysteries of chemistry, but the heavens themselves, a slab covered in star maps and secrets. Carved by the Sumerians, it may hold the first recorded glimpse of a cataclysmic eventer, something far stranger. Up next, the Sumerian star map. The Sumerian star map? It's a simple slab of baked clay, rectangular, weathered, etched with cuneiform. At first glance, it's just another Sumerian tablet, the kind you'd expect to see cataloging sheep or tracking barley rations. But this one is different. It doesn't count livestock. It maps the sky. And it may record the most terrifying astronomical event ever witnessed by humans. Welcome to the Sumerian star map, also known as Planisphere K 8538. Unearthed in Nineveh, modern-day Iraq, in the 19th century and currently housed in the British Museum, this 5,500-year-old artifact might be the oldest known record of an actual event in the night sky, an observation so dramatic it left a scar across history. But first, how do we even know it's a star map? That's where the decoding begins. For years, scholars treated the tablet as a curiosities, fragmented script, and odd circular diagrams resisting easy translation. It wasn't until the late 20th century that researchers began to suspect it was more than religious poetry or a farmer's almanac. Astronomer Dr. Paul Burley and engineer Alan Bond proposed a radical reinterpretation. This wasn't mythology. It was data. The symbols and lines weren't metaphors, they were coordinates. The curved etchings matched constellations visible from Mesopotamia around 3300 BCE. And more importantly, they weren't just any stars. They described a movement, a fiery object crossing the sky, fragmenting, impacting. According to this interpretation, the Sumerians may have been recording the approach of an asteroid or cometone that split apart in Earth's atmosphere, sending fragments crashing into the region near Kofels, Austria. Wait, Austria? Yes, thousands of kilometers away. But here's the thing. There's a massive 500-meter scar in the Austrian Alps, an ancient landslide caused by an explosive event with no confirmed crater. The Sumerian star map might just be the missing eyewitness account of what caused it. According to the theory, sometime around 3123 BCE, a bolide, essentially a space rock on steroids, entered Earth's atmosphere, skipped across the sky like a cosmic stone, and fragmented. One of its pieces slammed into Europe, triggering a blast equal to hundreds of Hiroshima bombs. The resulting shockwave flattened forests, melted rock, and created the strange geological features still visible today. And someone in Mesopotamia saw it happen. They didn't know what an asteroid was. They didn't have telescopes. But they looked up, saw the sky burn and the stars dance, and did what humans do best. They wrote it down. The star map becomes, in this view, a pre-scientific attempt at astronomy, a witness testimony from the dawn of written language. It's as if someone in the Bronze Age filmed a meteor strike, only their camera was a clay tablet and their software was cuneiform. But of course, not everyone agrees. Mainstream archaeologists are cautious. They point out the text's ambiguity, the difficulty of matching ancient constellation names with modern ones, and the danger of reading modern science into ancient symbolism. It's possible the event was metaphorical story of gods and omens, not rocks and impact craters. Still, the interpretation refuses to die, because it hints at something deeper, that our ancestors were not just stargazers, but skywatchers. That they didn't just look up for myth, they looked for meaning. They noticed when things changed. When the familiar constellations were broken by something new, fast and terrifying, and maybe they feared it would happen again. Because the Sumerians weren't casual about the heavens. Their priests studied the stars obsessively, tracking planetary movements with eerie precision. Their temples doubled as observatories. Their myths blended gods and astronomy like inseparable twins. The star map is part of that legacy. Whether it records a real impact event, a cosmic metaphor, or both, it reminds us that ancient humans weren't just looking at the stars for decoration. They were watching them for survival. And in a strange twist of cosmic irony, this dusty clay slab might be the first human attempt to say, "Something big just happened. We saw it. We wrote it down. Don't forget." And speaking of sacred relics bearing the imprint of the unexplainable, let's step from celestial flames to the silent linen of legend. A shroud bearing the face of a mansum, say the man marked not by stylus or ink, but by something no one's ever been able to replicate. It's time to unfold the mystery of the Shroud of Turin. The Shroud of Turin. It's a single sheet of linen, 14 feet long and 3.5 feet wide, faintly marked with the image of a man. A man with wounds on his wrists, puncture marks on his forehead, a gash in his side, and scourge wounds across his back. A man who, according to some, was crucified. To others, this is not just any man. This is Jesus Christ. Or so the legend goes. The Shroud of Turin is either the most sacred relic in all of Christianity or one of history's most elaborate and enduring hoaxes. Either it miraculously preserved the image of a crucified man 2,000 years ago, or someone in the medieval period had access to imaging techniques centuries ahead of their time. Because here's the kicker. The image isn't painted, it isn't drawn, it isn't etched, it just is. The shroud's first undeniable appearance in historical records dates back to the 14th century in France. That's when it was displayed publicly as a relic of Christ. Immediately, controversy erupted. The local bishop declared it a fake. The Pope approved its display but refused to confirm its authenticity. Then in 1578, the shroud was transferred to Turin, Italy, where it remains today, housed in a climate-controlled case inside the Cathedral of St. John the Baptist. Since then, it has survived fire, wars, religious reformations, and the scrutiny of science. And still, no one agrees on what it really is. Let's get into the details. The image on the shroud is subtle, visible more clearly in photographic negatives than with the naked eye. In 1898, an amateur Italian photographer named Secondo Pia took the first official photos of the shroud. When he developed the negatives, he nearly dropped them in shock. The negative image revealed a positiva, hauntingly clear portrait of a man, detailed in ways the original linen never suggested. Suddenly, this wasn't just an old piece of cloth. It was a mystery printed in reverse. From there, things got stranger. The man's wounds matched those described in the Gospels. Wrist and foot piercings, scourging, crown of thorns, and post-mortem blood flow consistent with crucifixion. Pollen analysis suggests the cloth was once in the Middle East. Microscopic traces of rare limestone found on the shroud match the geology of Jerusalem. It bleeds authenticity until science steps in with a ruler. In 1988, 3 laboratories conducted radiocarbon dating on tiny samples from the shroud. Their conclusion? The linen dated to between 1,260 and 1,390 CE. Medieval. Boom. Hoax confirmed. Except, not quite. Critics of the carbon dating argue that the samples used may have come from a repaired section of the shroud stitched in during medieval restorations after fire damage. Other researchers point out that contamination, environmental exposure, or even the intense heat of earlier fires could have skewed the results. The debate rages on. Then there's the image itself. Numerous attempts to replicate the shroud's image using medieval materials, iron oxide, acid etching, painting have produced close results, but none match the spectral, almost holographic quality of the original. The image on the shroud isn't just superficial, it penetrates only the top few fibers of the cloth. There are no brush strokes, no pigment, no known method then or now fully explains how it was made. Some propose it was created using a burst of light or energy in early photographic technique, radiation, an unknown chemical reaction, a miracle. To believers, the shroud is the silent witness of resurrection, a physical imprint of the most pivotal moment in human spiritual history. To skeptics, it's an ingenious piece of religious art, crafted to awe the faithful and draw pilgrims. But here's where the Shroud of Turin becomes more than a religious artifact. It becomes a mirror, because it doesn't prove anything. It makes you choose. You either see a forgery, you see a face that death couldn't erase. You either see medieval trickery, ancient testimony. Faith, science, doubt, they all converge in this one linen riddle. And maybe that's the point. Maybe the power of the shroud isn't in what it is, but in what it makes us wrestle with. Belief, evidence, trust, time. It asks the unanswerable question, what if truth can't be measured, only witnessed? And speaking of mysteries recorded on ancient scroll truths, hidden in plain text but wrapped in enigma, there's one more relic that could lead to untold treasure. A list of locations, a map with no coordinates, a scroll that reads like a myth but smells like gold. Prepare yourself for the mystery of the Copper Scroll. The Copper Scroll. In a cave near Qumran, on the northwest shore of the Dead Sea, buried among hundreds of parchment scrolls containing ancient religious texts, was something that didn't belong. It wasn't made of parchment or papyrus. It wasn't fragile or burned. It was metal, two thin sheets of corroded copper, rolled tight and sealed for nearly 2,000 years. This was not a scripture, not a parable, not a theological debate. This was a treasure map. The Copper Scroll, discovered in 1952 as part of the Dead Sea Scrolls collection, doesn't talk about God or prophecy. It lists places, it lists quantities, and it lists an absolutely insane amount of treasure. 64 locations, to be precise, each one with detailed measurements and cryptic clues, buried beneath steps, hidden near cisterns, tucked away in tombs. Some entries mention vessels of gold and silver. Others refer to scrolls, priestly garments, or sacred artifacts. In total, the inventory adds up to over 4,600 talents of precious metals. That's roughly 120 tons of gold and silver. If the numbers are accurate, we're talking billions of dollars in today's money. Enough to make the Copper Scroll the holy grail of treasure hunters and one of the most baffling documents in biblical archaeology. But here's the thing. No one has ever found a single item listed on the scroll. Not one. Let's talk context. The Copper Scroll is written in a different dialect of Hebrew than the other Dead Sea Scrolls. It's engraved, not inscribed. That alone sets it apart. Scholars believe it dates to around 70 CE, year the Romans destroyed the Second Temple in Jerusalem, which raises the obvious theory. Was this treasure hidden to protect it from the Romans? Some believe the Copper Scroll is the inventory of temple wealth hidden by priests during the siege of Jerusalem, scattered across the desert, mountains, and valleys to prevent it from falling into Roman hands. Others think it might reference a Second Temple treasury, or even older caches from the time of the Babylonian exile. But here's where things get weird. Some locations are specific in the water conduit of the pool on the north side of the salt pit. Others are maddeningly vague under the great cedar tree. Great. There are only about 1 billion of those in the Levant. Worse still, many of the sites may have changed or vanished completely. Landslides, construction, erosion, 2,000 years will do that. Some clues may refer to places that no longer exist, or were never named outside of oral tradition. Some believe the scroll itself was designed to be read only by those already in the know, kind of coded GPS for insiders. And then there's the conspiracy crowd. Some say the scroll is a fake, that it was created as a ruse, a spiritual misdirection, or even a decoy. Others argue the treasure was already recovered centuries ago, quietly looted by those who cracked the code and kept their mouths shut. A few suggest that modern governments, Israel, Jordan, or secret religious sects are hiding the truth to prevent chaos or desecration. But the most haunting possibility? That the treasure is still out there, buried beneath desert sands, entombed in caves, hidden in walls no one's bothered to tap. That the copper scroll isn't just a list, it's a challenge. A whisper from the past, daring someone to finish what was started. Expeditions have tried. In the 1960s, a team led by archaeologist Vendell Jones, allegedly an inspiration for Indiana Jones, spent years digging in the Qumran region. He claimed to find temple incense and sacred oils, but no gold. Others have combed the Judean desert with ground-penetrating radar, picks, and prayer. Still no dice. And yet the scroll persists, because it doesn't promise glory. It promises answers. If we found just one citif, a single cache where recovered it could validate the whole thing. It could rewrite our understanding of the Second Temple era. It could connect the dots between faith, history, and myth. Until then, the copper scroll remains locked, not by key or code, but by time. Its directions spiral inward, leading nowhere and everywhere at once. A treasure hunt designed for people who aren't around to finish it. And that brings us to a different kind of missing. Peacewown, not buried but vanished. A resting place sought for centuries. A tomb that should be obvious but has never been found. It belonged to a man who conquered the known world, only to disappear into the mists of legend. Next, the tomb of Alexander the Great. The tomb of Alexander the Great. He conquered empires before the age of 30. He named cities after himself, like a man speed-running civilization. He cut the Gordian knot, claimed divine parentage, and marched from Macedonia to the edge of India, like a man on fire. Alexander the Great didn't just rewrite maps, she burned his name into them. And then, he vanished. Not in myth, in body. Because for all the glory, all the statues, all the legends that surround him, we've never found his tomb. Think about that. One of history's most influential figures, commander of the greatest military campaign the world had ever seen, just dropped off the archaeological radar. We know more about where Cleopatra might be buried than where Alexander definitely should be. It's not for lack of trying. Historical sources agree that Alexander died in Babylon in 323 BCE, under mysterious circumstances: fever, poison, malaria, assassination, take your pick. His body, according to most ancient accounts, was then embalmed and placed in a gold sarcophagus inside a gold casket, which was placed in another gold container, all packed like a royal nesting doll. The first plan? Ship him back to Macedonia. The actual outcome? A theft in transit. According to ancient historians like Diodorus Siculus and Plutarch, his general Ptolemy I hijacked the funeral procession and rerouted the body to Egypt's own new kingdom. Why? Because possessing the corpse of Alexander meant possessing legitimacy. His body was political capital, the ultimate relic. So Ptolemy built a tomb, likely in Memphis at first, later transferring the remains to Alexandria, the city Alexander himself had founded. There, the body reportedly rested in a grand mausoleum known as the Soma Shrine, visited by emperors including Julius Caesar, Augustus, and Caligula. In fact, Caligula was said to have stolen Alexander's breastplate, just another day in the life of a deranged Roman emperor. Then, silence. By the 3rd or 4th century CE, mentions of the tomb dry up. Alexandria was battered by earthquakes, tsunamis, religious upheaval, and time. The city's precise topography changed. Structures crumbled. The Soma was lost. And since then, the search has never stopped. Modern archaeologists, treasure hunters, and amateur sleuths have proposed dozens of locations, under mosques, beneath libraries, somewhere in the catacombs. Even in places far beyond Alexandria Siwa Oasis, northern Greece, Venice, seriously, or a secret vault under the Vatican. Excavations have turned up promising Leeds Hellenistic tombs, cryptic inscriptions, sarcophagi with royal flair but none confirmed. Some researchers believe the tomb was deliberately hidden or destroyed during early Christian or Islamic purges to prevent pagan worship. Others suggest the body was moved multiple times, each relocation further burying it in mystery. And that brings us to the modern problem. Alexandria is alive. A bustling, layered, urban sprawl built atop millennia of ruins. You can't just dig at random. You need permission, funding, and a miracle. Most of what's underground is underwater now thanks to centuries of coastal subsidence and tsunamis. The ancient royal quarter, possibly beneath the harbor, which is both tragic and poetic. The man who wanted to become a god may have gotten his wish not in eternal life, but in eternal mystery. We don't have his bones. We don't have his sarcophagus. We only have shadows, rumors, and silence. And yet, his absence still commands attention. Because finding the tomb of Alexander the Great would be one of the most important archaeological discoveries in human history. It would connect eras, validate histories, answer questions we didn't even know to ask. Until then, we're left chasing a phantom through the alleys of Alexandria, listening for footsteps that echo across centuries. And speaking of vanishing body parts, let's shift focus from a missing corpse to a missing nose, a facial feature lost to time, a casualty of politics, war, or weather. Up next, the Sphinx's missing nose. The Sphinx's missing nose. It's the most iconic profile in archaeology, and it's missing half its face. The Great Sphinx of Giza, that monumental guardian of the pyramids, has stood watch over the Egyptian sands for thousands of years. It's massive, majestic, haunting. And yet the thing people most obsess over is what's not there. The nose. It's not just gone, it's violently gone. The damage is precise, carved, deliberate. You can see the groove where the bridge once stood, the chisel marks in the nostrils. This wasn't erosion. This was an act, a choice. But by whom? Theories stretch across centuries. The usual suspects come out to play. Let's run the interrogation. Suspect number 1, Napoleon's army. This is the big one. A popular myth claims that French troops used the Sphinx for target practice in the late 18th century and blasted the nose off with a cannonball. Sounds cinematic, and let's be honest, fits the vibe of bored colonial soldiers with access to explosives. But there's a problem. Sketches of the Sphinx from before Napoleon's arrival, like those by Danish explorer Frederick Norden in 1737, already show the Sphinx noseless. Napoleon gets a bad rap, but this time, he's got an alibi. Suspect number 2, Mohammed Sa'im al-Dar. According to some Islamic historians, the nose was destroyed by a Sufi Muslim named Muhammad Sa'im al-Dar in the 14th century. Outraged by local peasants offering sacrifices to the Sphinx in hopes of better harvests, he supposedly defaced the idol to stop the blasphemy. For his efforts, he was lynched. There's no direct archaeological evidence for this account, but it's plausible. Religious iconoclasm was common, and the Sphinx, half buried and half forgotten, could easily have become a target. Suspect number 3, natural erosion. This is the defense attorney's favorite argument, that the nose was worn away by time and wind. But again, those chisel marks tell a different story. Erosion softens. This was gouged, purposefully, like someone wanted the Sphinx to look mutilated. Suspect number 4. Ancient looters or tomb robbers. Less commonly floated, but still on the board. Defacing a statue could have been a form of curse-breaking or ritual desecration. Damaging the face, especially the nose, was often done to sever a statue's breath of life. In ancient Egypt, the nose was a channel of power. Destroy the nose, and you destroy the statue's soul. In other words, this was magical murder. And that's where this mystery transcends forensic debate, because in ancient Egyptian belief, statues weren't just representations, they were vessels. Through rituals, the spirit of a god or king could inhabit the statue. It could see, breathe, be. Defacing that vessel wasn't vandalism. It was metaphysical warfare. So what does that make the Sphinx's missing nose? An assassination. In stone. What remains is a face frozen in damaged dignity. A reminder that even the most enduring monuments are vulnerable to faith, to fear, to fists. And maybe that's why the missing nose sticks with us. Because it's not just an absence, it's a symbol of loss, of defiance, of history's habit of rewriting itself with a hammer. And if a nose can vanish, what else have we lost? Which brings us to another silent sentinel of the past, less famous than the Sphinx, but equally enigmatic. Massive, ancient heads with blank, watching eyes, carved from stone and staring through centuries, left by a people we still barely understand. Prepare to meet the Olmec colossal heads. The Olmec colossal heads. They loom silently in the tropical lowlands of Mexico, some weighing up to 50 tons, each carved from a single boulder, each with the same unmistakable feature: a face, broad nose, thick lips. A helmet-like headdress, unblinking eyes that seem to look through time itself. These are the Olmec colossal heads, massive stone monoliths left behind by one of Mesoamerica's earliest and most mysterious civilizations. They don't speak, they don't move, but they ask a single, thunderous question. Why were these made? The Olmecs are often called the mother culture of Mesoamerica. Flourishing between 1,500 and 400 BCE, they laid the groundwork for everything that came after Zapotec, Maya, Aztec. But unlike those successors, the Olmecs left no pyramids, no codices, no clear texts, just art, haunting, powerful, and often very, very strange. And the most powerful of all? The heads. 17 have been discovered so far, mostly along Mexico's Gulf Coast in sites like San Lorenzo, La Venta, and Tres Zapotes. Each one has different distinct features, expressions, proportions. Some serene, some stern. These aren't generic gods or idealized rulers. They're portraits, real people, immortalized in basalt. But who were they? The prevailing theory is that these were ruler kings or elite warriors commemorated in stone. Their helmets might be battle gear or ballgame protection or something ceremonial. If true, the heads were political statements. Here is power, here is legacy. But the mystery isn't just who they are, it's how they were made. The basalt used for the heads came from the Tuxtla Mountains, up to 50 miles from the final carving sites. That means these multi-ton boulders had to be quarried, shaped, and then dragged without wheels, without beasts of burden, through dense jungle and swamp. Think about that. The Olmecs moved 50-ton rocks with nothing but ropes, manpower, and sheer audacity. In some cases, they carved the heads on site, but even that would have required an insane amount of coordination. No iron tools, no written plans, just hammers, chisels, and vision. Why go to all this effort? Some say it was to assert dominance, These heads were positioned in public plazas, arranged for maximum impact. They were propaganda in stone eternal advertisements for the ruling class. Others believed they had spiritual or cosmological significance, serving as intermediaries between humans and gods. But then the theories start to spiral. Because some of the heads have features that seem out of place. Thick lips, broad noses, eyes that don't quite match the local norm. This has led some to claim the Olmecs had contact with Africa, that the heads are depictions of Nubian or West African travelers, or even that the Olmecs were African. Mainstream scholars push back hard. There's no genetic or cultural evidence of pre-Columbian transatlantic contact. The features, they argue, are consistent with indigenous Mesoamerican populations. The helmets, Olmec ballgame gear, the expressions, purely local. Still, the debate lingers, because the heads feel like they carry a story too big for their silence. A story erased by jungle and time. Even more intriguing, some of the heads were deliberately buried, positioned face down, or hidden under layers of earth. Why? Were they decommissioned? Ritualistically entombed? Or were later generations trying to erase them? We don't know. And that's what makes them powerful. They're not just sculptures. They're interruptions, monolithic what-ifs embedded in the timeline. They force us to reckon with a civilization we barely understand, but one that clearly understood itself well enough to leave behind monuments that still defy gravity, logic, and explanation. The Olmec colossal heads don't speak our language. They don't need to. They are presence made stone. And presence can't be faked. And now, we pivot from Mexico to the highlands of China. From deliberate carving to mysterious discs inscribed with tiny, microscopic hieroglyphs. A discovery so controversial, many scholars refuse to even acknowledge it. Get ready for the Dropa stones. The Dropa stones, buried deep in the Bayanhar Mountains of western China, near the border of Tibet, is a story that sounds like science fiction, or a hoax, or maybe just Mabia suppressed truth waiting for rediscovery. It begins in 1938, when Chinese archaeologist Chi Pu-te led an expedition into the remote caves of the Bayan Karaula range. There, he and his team allegedly uncovered a cluster of ancient burial sites unlike anything found in Chinese archaeology. The skeletons inside? Short about 4 feet tall, with abnormally large heads. Frail bodies. Not quite human. Then came the stones. Hundreds of them. Disc-shaped. About a foot across. Each with a perfectly round hole in the center. Like vinyl records forged from stone. But these weren't just smooth discs. They were carved, with a spiral groove etched from the center to the rim, and inside that spiral, tiny, almost microscopic hieroglyphic-like characters. The story goes that the characters were so small, it took decades and advanced technology to even attempt a translation. When they finally were decoded, the results were so bizarre, they bordered on cosmic parody. The translation, reportedly completed by a Chinese professor named Tsum Nui in the 1960s, described a race of beings called the Dropa, who crash-landed on Earth 12,000 years ago. Stranded, unable to leave, they sought refuge in the mountains. Eventually, they were hunted and killed by local tribes who feared them as invaders. The Dropa, according to this narrative, weren't gods. They weren't even conquerors. They were castaways, victims, alien refugees, whose only crime was being different. Of course, this sounds insane, and it might be. Mainstream archaeologists have dismissed the story as a hoax. There's no physical proof of the original discovery, no photographs from the 1938 expedition, no verifiable records of Tsum Nui or his supposed translation. Chinese authorities deny the existence of the Dropa or the stones. The whole story only emerged through fringe journals and UFO circles in the West, decades after the alleged discovery. And yet, there are photos. A few grainy, disputed images exist of strange stone discs stored in a museum in Xi'an. One in particular, photographed by Austrian engineer Ernst Wegerer in the 1970s, shows two worn discs with central holes and faint spiral grooves, but no inscriptions are visible. And the museum reportedly lost the discs, or never had them, or you get the idea. So we're left in the dark, surrounded by rumors. Some say the stones were real, but their inscriptions have worn away. Others claim the story was an elaborate Cold War-era disinformation campaign, or a modern myth stitched together from older folklore and wishful thinking. But even skeptics acknowledge one thing: there are strange stone discs in China. Circular objects with drilled holes have been found in Neolithic burial sites throughout the region. Some are burial markers, some are wheels, some are ritual objects. None of them, as far as confirmed archaeology goes, contain spiral inscriptions. None tell a story of starships and stranded aliens. But maybe that's the point. The Dropa stones represent something larger than their supposed shape. They're a symbol of how myth, mystery, and our thirst for the unknown collide. A reminder that the boundary between legend and lie is often razor-thin, and that sometimes the story is the artifact. Because we want it to be true. We want the universe to be bigger than carbon dates and pottery shards. We want ancient peoples to have encountered something extraordinary. We want aliens on mountaintops, stone discs that hum when you touch them. A lost history waiting to be decoded. And whether the Dropa stones are real, faked, or misunderstood, they've already left their mark. And now, from high-altitude caves to the edge of the sea, we descend into another enigma made of stone, submerged beneath the waves, and believed by some to be the last surviving road to a lost continent. Prepare yourself for the Bimini Road. The Bimini Road. In the turquoise shallows off the coast of Bimini Island in the Bahamas, about 20 feet below the surface, lies what appears to be a road, or a wall, or maybe the remnants of a long-lost harbor. Stretching in a gentle arc for nearly half a mile, it's made of large, flat, rectangular stone, some as long as 15 feet arranged in a way that seems intentional. This is the Bimini Road, and for some, it's not just an underwater anomaly. It's the entrance to Atlantis. Let's rewind to the 1960s. Psychic Edgar Cayce, the sleeping prophet, had predicted that remnants of Atlantis would rise near Bimini around 1968 or 1969. Then, in 1968, divers discovered the formation. Giant stone blocks, laid end to end, just off Paradise Point. The media exploded. Cayce's followers rejoiced. Ancient astronaut theorists updated their PowerPoint slides. But what actually is the Bimini Road? That depends on who you ask. Geologists tend to say it's a natural formation. Specifically, beach rock, a type of limestone formed when sand and shell fragments cement together under specific conditions. Over time, beach rock can fracture into rectangular shapes, tumble with currents, and align into formations that look man-made. Nature's version of Lego bricks. According to this view, the Bimini Road is simply the result of erosion, tidal movement, and the brain's natural tendency to find order in chaos. But that's not the whole story. Because the stones do look arranged. Many are laid edge to edge, side by side, with little deviation in height. Some have 90-degree corners. Others rest atop smaller stones in ways that seem like foundational layering. Certain segments show signs of pivot points like rudimentary hinges or joints. And that's where the debate kicks into overdrive. Proponents of the artificial theory argue that the Bimini Road is all that remains of an ancient harbor, breakwater, or dock possibly from a civilization lost to time and tide. They point to underwater ridges, symmetrical blocks, and sonar scans suggesting larger structures nearby. Some go further, much further. They claim the Bimini Road is Atlantean, that it's the last surviving causeway of a civilization wiped from the map exactly as Plato described. They reference Casey's prophecies, Native American legends of sunken lands, and even Piri Reis's maps as evidence of a forgotten chapter in human history. Mainstream archaeology, however, remains unconvinced. No tools have been found, no artifacts, no inscriptions, no pottery, no definitive human footprint, just the rocks, arranged too perfectly to ignore but not definitively enough to prove. Yet the Bimini Road continues to seduce. Because it's just plausible enough. Because it lives at the edge of what we can test and what we can believe. It's an optical illusion with real weight, a geological formation draped in myth. The kind of mystery that forces you to ask, if it were man-made, what would that mean? It would mean humans were building megalithic structures in the Bahamas over 10,000 years ago during the last ice age, before the pyramids, before the wheel, before writing. It would mean we lost a civilization. And that's the real treasure of the Bimini Road, not gold or tridents, but the terrifying, exhilarating idea that we don't know everything. That the past holds secrets deeper than we imagined, hiding just below the waves. Today, divers still visit the site. Some are skeptics, some are believers. All emerge from the sea with the same look, that electric flicker of standing between certainty and wonder. Because whether the Bimini Road is a natural oddity or a lost avenue to Atlantis, it still leads somewhere. And now we follow that road inland, through history's most seductive ruins, to a mystery that's haunted archaeologists for centuries, the final resting place of the last pharaoh of Egypt. It's time to search for the tomb of Cleopatra. The tomb of Cleopatra. She was the last pharaoh of Egypt, a queen, a strategist, a seductress. Cleopatra's seven forever immortalized in the folds of history and tragedy. She held Rome's most powerful men in thrall, Caesar, Antony. She stood at the precipice of an empire's collapse, navigating politics, war, and betrayal with a cobra's grace. And then she vanished. Not figuratively, literally. We don't know where she's buried. One of the most recognizable women in world history, and yet her tomb remains one of archaeology's most persistent phantoms. For over 2,000 years, Cleopatra has ruled in absentia, haunting the ruins of Alexandria with her missing body. Let's set the scene. In 30 BCE, as Octavian's forces stormed Egypt, Cleopatra and her lover, Mark Antony, famously chose death over disgrace. Antony died by his own sword. Cleopatra, in one of the most theatrical exits ever recorded, reportedly allowed an asymbol of Egyptian royalty to bite her. The queen died, draped in gold, surrounded by her treasures, legend claims. Ancient sources Plutarch, Suetonius, Cassius Dio agree on one thing. She was buried with Antony in a splendid and regal tomb, but none of them mention where. Some say it was near the temple of Isis, whom Cleopatra revered. Others claim it was within a mausoleum she built herself, a pyramid-shaped monument in the royal quarter of Alexandria. That city, once a beacon of ancient grandeur, has suffered centuries of earthquakes, tsunamis, and urban sprawl. Much of it now lies beneath the sea, so the tomb could be anywhere. Beneath modern Alexandria, beneath the harbor, or deeper still, in myth and metaphor. But that hasn't stopped people from searching. In recent decades, the most serious contender has emerged not in Alexandria, but at a windswept site called Taposiris Magna, 45 kilometers west of the city. Here, archaeologist Kathleen Martinez has led an extensive excavation, driven by a bold hypothesis that Cleopatra and Antony are buried beneath this ancient temple dedicated to Osiris and Isis, the gods of resurrection and eternal love. Her reasoning is part logic, part intuition. Cleopatra wasn't just a ruler, she was a master of symbolism. In death, she would want to emulate the Isis-Osiris myth. Antony as Osiris, she as Isis. A union in death that echoed divine rebirth. Taposiris Magna fits the theme, and it was still active during Cleopatra's time. Martinez's dig has revealed underground chambers, hidden tunnels, mummies, coins bearing Cleopatra's face, and tantalizing clues. But no tomb, not yet. The site keeps offering hints, never answers. Meanwhile, underwater archaeologists have been scanning the drowned ruins of ancient Alexandria. They've mapped sunken columns, sphinxes, and temple platforms. The royal quarter is believed to be buried beneath the harbor. If her tomb is there, it's under tons of silt and sea. There's also the possibility her tomb was intentionally erased. After her death, Octavian, soon to become Augustus, had every reason to obscure her final resting place. Cleopatra was a symbol, a threat, a memory he wanted reshaped. Turning her into a tragic cautionary tale rather than a rival deity, bury her legacy, literally and figuratively. But if her tomb is found, it would be one of the greatest archaeological discoveries in history. Bigger than Tutankhamun. It would unite the histories of Egypt and Rome, love and war, myth and reality. Her face, familiar, yet debated, might finally meet ours. Her jewelry, her writings, her final thoughts, her truth. And that's why the search continues. Because Cleopatra isn't just a queen. She's a story, a symbol, a siren. And stories like hers don't end. They just go underground. Speaking of underground relics that weren't supposed to exist, let's leave ancient royalty behind and hike into the dark caves of New Zealand, where a preserved claw, still leathery, still terrifying, poses a question that shouldn't have an answer. What if something extinct wasn't? Prepare for the Mount Owen Moa Claw. The Mount Owen Moa Claw. In 1986, a team of archaeologists exploring a remote cave system beneath Mount Owen in New Zealand's South Island stumbled upon something that froze them mid-dig. It wasn't gold. It wasn't a relic. It was a claw. A massive, scaly, talon-tipped claw, still sheathed in ancient, leathery skin, still intact, still terrifying. It looked fresh, but it wasn't. What they had uncovered was the mummified foot of a giant moa, an extinct flightless bird that once roamed New Zealand. The claw was so well preserved it looked like it had just been severed. The dry, cold cave had perfectly embalmed it for over 2,000 years. But here's the question that clawed its way into everyone's mind. How was it in such good shape? Let's break this down. The moa was no ordinary bird. Some species stood over 12 feet tall and weighed nearly 500 pounds. Think ostrich, but on prehistoric steroids. For centuries, they were the uncontested titans of New Zealand's bird kingdom, until the Maori arrived around the late 13th century. Within 200 years, the moa were gone, hunted to extinction, every last one, or so we thought. The Mount Owen claw challenged that narrative, not because it proved moas still lived, but because of how intact it was. The mummified tissue, the preserved scales, the sheer horror movie realness of the thing, it didn't match our image of an ancient, extinct species. It looked like it belonged to a creature still alive, still lurking. Cue the cryptozoologists. Some leapt on the find as proof that moa might still roam the remotest regions of New Zealand. There had been whispers for decades, eyewitness accounts, blurry photos, stories from backcountry hikers about giant birds glimpsed through the mist. The claw gave those stories talons. Mainstream science rolled its collective eyes. Radiocarbon dating put the claw's age at roughly 2,000 years long before humans had even arrived in the region. The preservation? A lucky result of the cave's stable temperature, dry air, and the bird's massive size. And yet, the cave was remote enough that no human had set foot in it in modern times until that expedition. If a claw could survive for millennia untouched, could other parts, other creatures? Let's be clear, no living moa has been found, no recent DNA, no skeletons fresher than a few hundred years old. But the claw remains a symbol of how little we really know about extinction and how much we still don't understand about preservation. It's a perfect snapshot of a creature we only know from bones and legends. And it's real. You can touch it. Scientists have studied it, scanned it, preserved it again. It now sits in a museum, daring you to believe in monsters. The Mount Owen claw doesn't say, "The moa still walks," but it does whisper, "The past isn't done with you." And that's why it lingers in the imagination. It's not just a relic, it's a question mark, one sharp enough to leave a mark. And speaking of marks, let's journey to a place where stones fit together so tightly, not even a blade of grass can pass between them. Massive walls, impossible precision, and no mortar in sight. It's time to face the mystery of the Sacsayhuaman walls. The Sacsayhuaman walls. Towering above the city of Cusco in Peru, perched in the thin air of the Andes, lies a fortress or maybe a temple or perhaps both. It's called Sacsayhuaman, pronounced like sexy woman. And yes, the internet has made every joke. And it's one of the most mind-bending feats of ancient engineering on the planet. Because the walls at Sacsayhuaman shouldn't exist. Not like this. Not with this precision. Not built by a civilization without iron tools, wheels, or even written language. The stones, some weighing over 100 tons, are fitted together with such exactness that you can't slide a razor blade between them. No mortar, no gaps. Just perfectly matched, polygonal blocks, locked in place like some divine 3D jigsaw puzzle. Earthquakes that have leveled colonial buildings nearby barely scratch these walls. They flex, they absorb, they hold, and no one knows how they did it. This was the work of the Inca or someone before them. Sacsayhuaman is traditionally attributed to the Inca Empire, constructed in the 15th century under the reign of Pachacuti. But here's the kicker. Even the Spanish conquistadors were stunned. They couldn't figure out how the walls had been built, and neither could the Inca they conquered. Some of the stones were so large that the Spanish assumed giants must have helped. Archaeologists have theories. Lots of them. Ramps and rollers? Sure, but the terrain is steep and rugged. You're not hauling 100-ton rocks uphill on logs without breaking the planet. Levers and manpower? The Inca had incredible labor organization, yes, but shaping each stone so it interlocks with dozens of others in complex angles without modern tools stretches the imagination. This wasn't stacking bricks. This was stone origami. Softening the stone? Some legends say the Inca had a plant extract that could soften rock like clay. No such plant has been found, and the science doesn't add up, but the theory persists in whispers. Whatever the method, it's lost. No written records, no diagrams. The techniques used to build Sacsayhuaman's walls have vanished into the cloud forest of history. But the purpose? That's another mystery entirely. Some call it a fortress. The zigzag shape of the outer wall resembles defensive architecture, and its high vantage point makes it ideal for spotting invaders. Others say it was ceremonial sacred space, aligned with solstices, stars, and mountains, part of Cusco's cosmological design. And then there are the esoteric theories. That the site predates the Inca, that it was built by an earlier, unknown civilization with lost knowledge, that the stones were placed using sound frequencies or anti-gravity tech, that aliens dropped by to flex their megalithic muscles. Let's not go that far. But let's also not pretend this is normal. Even in the world of ancient stonework, Sacsayhuaman is in a league of its own. The precision, the scale, the defiance of natural disaster. These walls aren't just structures, they're messages. Stone declarations of what humans are capable of when they refuse to compromise. They challenge our assumptions about primitive engineering. They laugh at our dependence on steel and software. They say, "We knew things you've forgotten." And maybe that's why the walls still stand not just as monuments, but as mysteries. They weren't built for convenience. They were built for eternity. So what else have we forgotten? To answer that, let's leave the Andes and travel to the misty coasts of northern Europe, to a Neolithic village older than the pyramids. A settlement frozen in time, preserved beneath sand and stone, and then suddenly abandoned. No war, no disaster, just silence. Up next, the mystery of Skara Brae. The Skara Brae settlement. Off the northern tip of Scotland, battered by salt winds and centuries of cold rain, lies the Orkney Island's brooding landscape of sea cliffs, moorland, and silence. And nestled along the Bay of Scale is something astonishing. A perfectly preserved Stone Age village. Skara Brae isn't just old, it's ancient, older than Stonehenge, older than the pyramids. A Neolithic time capsule dated to around 3100 BCI. It could pass for a post-apocalyptic bunker. Roofless stone houses connected by tunnels, built-in furniture, hearths, storage spaces, beds. It's like someone pressed pause on prehistoric life and forgot to hit play again. And the strangest thing? No one knows why it was abandoned. Let's rewind to its discovery. In 1850, a violent storm tore across Orkney, stripping turf from a hill and revealing something strange. Stone walls, a passage, then rooms. It wasn't a burial mound or a lone dwelling, it was an entire village, buried under layers of sand and time. Over the next century, archaeologists excavated 8 homes, each with the same layout: a central hearth, 2 stone beds, and a dresser, like shelf facing the doors if to display prized possessions. Some even had early plumbing stone drains running underneath. These weren't caves, they were homes, warm, organized, and human. And they raise one massive question: who lived here? We don't know their names, no writing, no art of kings or battles, just carved stone tools, bone needles, decorative beads, and mysterious round carved balls like Neolithic fidget toys. Skara Brae's people were farmers, fishermen, and craftspeople. They built with stone because there were no trees. They lived communally. And they clearly weren't isolated. Trade goods from as far as the Scottish mainland and even Ireland have been found. This was a node in a larger web, a quiet center of something we still don't fully see. But then around 2500 BCE, poof, they left. No signs of fire, no mass graves, no toppled walls, just departure. As if they walked away mid-meal. So what happened? Climate change is the leading theory. Rising seas and worsening storms may have eroded the coast and flooded the village. The stone houses were built into midden heaps, essentially garbage mounds used as insulation. But even those weren't enough to hold off nature forever. Others suggest social collapse. Perhaps the community fractured under pressure, or religious shifts sent them elsewhere. Maybe the land could no longer support them. And then there are the more poetic ideas, that the people of Skara Brae didn't vanish at all, that they simply merged with neighboring cultures, assimilated, changed. But if so, they left nothing behind to explain why. Their homes remained, empty, intact, waiting. Today, Skara Brae is one of the best preserved Neolithic sites in the world. You can walk through it, stand in the same spaces where families once warmed their hands by the hearth, look out the same doorways that once opened to the cold Atlantic mist. And what strikes you is the familiarity. This wasn't some crude Stone Age camp. It was comfortable, The furniture is built to human scale. The homes are designed for cooperation and privacy. These weren't savages fumbling through survival. They were people who had figured out how to live together, efficiently and with care. And then they left, without saying why. That silence echoes through time, because if a society as well adapted as Skara Brae can disappear without a trace, what does that say about us? And speaking of disappearances, let's journey to the Himalayas. To a glacial lake ringed by death, a place so remote it went unnoticed for centuries until hikers stumbled across its secret. Hundreds of ancient skeletons, frozen in time, lying beneath the surface. Prepare yourself for the haunting mystery of Rupkund Lake. The skeleton lake of Rupkund, high in the Indian Himalayas, nearly 16,000 feet above sea level, sits a frozen lake so remote it might as well be on another planet. Rupkund, a glacial pool the color of slate, surrounded by jagged peaks and permanent silence. But when the ice melts in summer, the lake reveals a secretone that has baffled scientists, historians, and mountaineers for decades. Bones, hundreds of them. Skeletal remains, scattered around the lake and floating in its waters. Skulls, femurs, rib cages, some bleached white, others still wrapped in bits of flesh or hair, preserved by cold and altitude. The local name for Rupkund is Skeleton Lake, and it earns that name every time the ice pulls back. But here's the real mystery. No one knows who they were, why they died here. Let's go back to the first official discovery. In 1942, a British forest ranger patrolling the area stumbled upon the lake and saw something straight out of a nightmare, bones everywhere, poking out from beneath the snow. At first, the British assumed the remains belonged to Japanese soldiers trying to sneak through during World War II. They were wrong, very wrong. Radiocarbon dating later revealed that the skeletons were much older, some over 1,200 years old. But here's where it gets weirder. They don't all date to the same time. Some are from the 9th century, others from as late as the 19th century. Different people, different periods, all dying in the same place. The plot thickens. In 2004, a team of Indian and European scientists conducted a full-scale study. They examined dozens of bodies. What they found blew the mystery wide open. Many of the skulls had identical trauma patterns, massive fractures to the back of the head, with no signs of defensive wounds or battle injuries. Cause of death? Blunt force trauma, but not from weapons, from something round, something falling. Like hail. Giant hailstones, the size of coconuts, smashing down from the sky with lethal force. It sounds ridiculous, like a rejected Game of Thrones subplot, but local folk songs speak of just such a storm. A group of pilgrims, crossing the treacherous path, caught in divine punishment. The gods, angry at their disrespect, rained death from above. And it might be true. The prevailing theory? A group of travelers, possibly pilgrims, possibly soldiers, was caught in a freak hailstorm around the 9th century. With no shelter on the exposed mountainside, they were pelted to death by icy missiles. Instant apocalypse. But that still doesn't explain everything. Recent DNA analysis revealed that the skeletons weren't all from the same ethnic background. Some were locals, Indian mountain people, but others, Mediterranean, specifically Greek, from the 1800s. What were Greeks doing in the Himalayas? There's no record, no journal, no explanation, just bones, scattered beside the older ones, as if Rupkund Lake was some kind of death magnet. So what do we have? A high-altitude lake in the middle of nowhere. Skeletons from multiple centuries. Some killed by hail, others unknown. No consistent cause, no unified purpose, just death. It's not a battlefield. There are no weapons. It's not a cemetery. There are no graves. It's just a place where people died, over and over, and no one knows why they kept coming. Rupkund doesn't offer answers. It offers layers. The more you peel back, the more confusing it gets. Theories come and go, pilgrimages gone wrong, trade caravans wiped out, cursed terrain. But the bones remain, silent as snowfall. Today, Rupkund is a pilgrimage of a different kind for hikers, researchers, and the terminally curious. But it's dangerous, treacherous. The same icy winds that preserve the skeletons can kill you just as easily. The mountain takes what it wants, and so the lake waits. Still, cold, watching, because mysteries don't always come in the form of monuments or lost tombs. Sometimes they come as echo-scattering bones whispering a story we may never fully hear. Gobekli Tepe. High atop a barren hill in southeastern Turkey, a ring of ancient stones stands in defiance of everything we thought we knew about civilization. Not just old, but impossibly old. Older than the pyramids. Older than Stonehenge. Older than pottery, agriculture, cities, and written language. Welcome to Gobekli Tepe, a temple that predates history, a riddle carved in stone, a place so advanced for its time, it has forced archaeologists to rewrite the very timeline of human development. Let's break it down. Discovered in 1994 by German archaeologist Klaus Schmidt, Gobekli Tepe, which means potbelly hill in Turkish, appeared at first to be nothing more than a mound of dirt and rubble. Locals had been farming the area for generations, unaware that beneath their feet lay the ruins of the world's first known temple. Once excavation began, the truth emerged slowly, then with the force of revelation. Massive T-shaped stone pillars, some over 20 feet tall and weighing 10-20 tons each, arranged in circular enclosures. The stones were decorated with exquisite carvings: foxes, snakes, boars, scorpions, vultures, lions executed with a precision that suggests not just skill, but culture. These weren't crude stabs at art. They were statements, symbols, stories. And here's the headline. Gobekli Tepe is over 11,000 years old. That's 6,000 years before the pyramids. It predates the wheel, the plow, writing, even farming. Let that sink in. According to every archaeological model before this discovery, humans at the time were still nomadic hunter-gatherers. No permanent settlements, no religion in the organized sense. No large-scale construction, but Gobekli Tepe flips that script. These were monument builders, ritual makers, architects of meaning before they were architects of cities. And the mystery only deepens. There are dozens of stone circles at the site, but only a few have been fully excavated. Beneath each enclosure, more are weight-layered like an onion. The oldest structures are the deepest and the most advanced. As you go up in time, the constructions get simpler, cruder, as if the builders forgot their own genius. And then, around 8000 BCE, they did something unthinkable. They buried it. Intentionally. The entire site was backfilled with dirt, debris, and rubble, deliberately covered up as if to preserve or hide it. Why? No one knows. Was it a cultural shift? A new religion rising? A societal collapse? The site lay undisturbed for millennia, forgotten, protected by its own grave. So what was Gobekli Tepe? A temple? A shrine? A place of sacrifice? Some argue it was a pilgrimage site. People came from miles around to take part in rituals, perhaps timed with the stars. Others think it was an early experiment in religion, a place where myth met monument. But there are more esoteric theories too. That Gobekli Tepe was built with the help of a lost civilization and advanced people who passed on their knowledge to humanity's scattered tribes. That its carvings encode astronomical data, even warnings about comet impacts or celestial events. Some see echoes of Atlantis. Others whisper about ancient astronauts. Mainstream archaeologists scoff, of course. They see no need for aliens or lost cultures, only a need to expand what we think humans were capable of in the Neolithic. And they're probably right. The people who built Gobekli Tepe weren't primitive. They were innovators, dreamers. People who looked at the stars, saw stories, and carved them in stone. And that might be the most radical idea of all, that we've always been this way. Gobekli Tepe doesn't just push back the date of civilization. It challenges the whole concept of progress. It suggests that human imagination, our ability to create meaning, build symbols, invent gods came before the plow, the city, the state. That maybe it wasn't agriculture that led to temples, but temples that led to agriculture. Because when people believe in something together, they build. The Hellenikon Pyramid, Greece. It doesn't look like much at first glance. Nestled in the olive-strewn hills of the Argolis region in the eastern Peloponnese, the Pyramid of Hellenikon doesn't tower above the landscape like its Egyptian cousins. It's squat, humble. Almost too unassuming for the firestorm of controversy it sparked among archaeologists, historians, and conspiracy theorists alike. Because this structure is a cluster of weathered limestone blocks forming a trapezoidal shape, maybe one of the oldest pyramids on Earth. Older than Giza. Older than Stonehenge. Possibly even older than recorded Greek history itself. That's the claim, anyway. And it's what has made the Hellenikon Pyramid one of the most whispered about relics in ancient European archaeology. It's a structure that sits quietly, almost sheepishly, in a quiet field, and yet it screams a question that no one's been able to answer definitively. What the hell is it doing here? Let's dig in. The Hellenikon Pyramid is one of several pyramid-like structures scattered throughout Greece, but it's by far the most studied. Located just outside the town of Argos, it measures roughly 7 by 9 meters at the base and rises to a height of about 3.5 meters, though it may have originally been taller. It's built of large limestone blocks, fitted together without mortar, in a style known as polygonal masonry, a technique known for its earthquake resistance and aesthetic subtlety. So far, so normal. Ancient Greece had a long architectural tradition, but here's where things start getting spicy. In the early 1990s, a study by the Academy of Athens used a technique called thermoluminescence, dating to estimate the age of the structure. The result? 2,720 BCE. Let's pause there. 2,720 BCE would place the Hellenikon Pyramid at the same time or, possibly, before the construction of Egypt's step pyramid of Djoser, widely recognized as the world's first monumental pyramid. If the dating is accurate, it means that Greek civilization was dabbling in monumental pyramid construction over 4,700 years ago. And no one talks about it. Why? Because most mainstream archaeologists don't buy the date. They argue the structure was likely built during the classical or Hellenistic period between the 4th and 2nd centuries BCEs, a type of fortified outpost, a small watchtower, or possibly even a cenotaph. There's little in the way of written records to clarify things. Pausanias, the 2nd century Greek traveler and geographer, made mention of a pyramid near Argos, claiming it was built to commemorate a battle in which local soldiers were buried. But Pausanias wasn't exactly known for his architectural accuracy, and he never went inside. Which brings us to the second problem, the interior. Unlike the Egyptian pyramids with their complex chambers and ritual passages, the Hellenikon Pyramid features a single rectangular room. It's accessed through a narrow corridor and shows no obvious signs of religious function. No sarcophagus, no inscriptions, no relics, just stone walls and silence. This has led to a wild range of theories. Theory 1. The cenotaph. Some scholars believe the pyramid was symbolic memorial for the dead, not a tomb. The idea being that the pyramid shape was culturally significant, perhaps borrowed from Egyptian or Eastern influences via trade routes. Theory 2. The lookout tower. Another hypothesis argues it was a military structure, a watch post, overseeing the Argive plains, part of a defensive network. But then, why the pyramid shape? Why not just build a square tower? Theory 3. Lost technology, forgotten culture. This is where the rabbit hole gets deep. Some believe the Hellenikon pyramid is evidence of a lost, pre-Hellenic culture capable of monumental architecture, possibly influenced by or influencing early Egypt. A culture that vanished without a trace, leaving behind just enough stone to screw with our historical timeline. Theory 4. Ancient astronomical marker. Others suggest an astronomical function. The alignment of the pyramid's entrance may have corresponded with specific star risings or solstices. These ideas often get lumped into the fringe category, but they reflect a growing interest in the archaeoastronomical significance of ancient structures worldwide. So what are we left with? A small, strange, incredibly old, or possibly not that old, stone pyramid. A structure with no clear function, no solid historical context, and a dating method that the archaeological community can't seem to agree on. But it exists. You can touch it, walk around it, feel its silent defiance. And if the early date is even remotely accurate, it could rewrite the narrative of early European civilization. It would suggest that the Greeks or their cultural ancestors were building monumental, geometrically advanced structures while the rest of Europe was still banging rocks together and drawing deer on cave walls. It also raises a haunting possibility. What else have we missed? If a pyramid could sit in plain sight for millennia, misunderstood, misdated, or simply ignored, how many other relics are we misreading? How many other stories have we overwritten with the assumptions of linear history? That's the true power of the Hellenikon pyramid. It's not about its size, or even its age. It's about doubt. It forces us to question the smooth, clean narrative we've constructed about the past. It whispers that maybe, just maybe, the ancient world was far messier, more complex, and more interconnected than we've dared to admit. And speaking of whispers from a lost world, our next mystery takes us from the sunlit hills of Greece to one of the most remote and isolated islands on Earth, a place famous for its stone faces but hiding a secret even stranger. Not carved in stone, but written in wood. Next stop, the cryptic, undeciphered symbols of the Rongorongo script of Easter Island. The Rongorongo script, Easter Island. Easter Island is famous for its stone giants, those brooding Moai statues, standing like sentinels over empty plains, their backs to the ocean, their faces turned inward. But while those megalithic heads have captured the world's imagination, the island's most haunting mystery isn't in the statues. It's in the script. A series of wooden tablets, etched with strange looping symbol swirls, lines, humanoid figures, animal forms, geometric colossal, carved in a style unlike anything found anywhere else in the world. It's called Rongorongo, and it may be one of the only known examples of an independently invented writing system in human history. Or not, because no one's ever been able to read it. Let's rewind. Rongorongo came to modern attention in the 19th century, after missionaries arrived on Easter Island, also known as Rapa Nui, and began converting the local population. In 1864, Eugène Hérode, a French missionary, noted that the islanders possessed tablets covered in hieroglyphic characters and that they seemed to handle them with reverence. At the time, no one paid much attention. After all, the prevailing colonial view was that indigenous peoples couldn't possibly have developed a written language on their own. But later, as more tablets surfaced, often as curios, sometimes salvaged from thatched roofs or firewood piles, scholars began to realize they were looking at something rare, something potentially world-shaking. The symbols didn't match any known writing system. They weren't derivatives of Polynesian glyphs, Chinese ideograms, or even Mayan script. They were unique, self-contained. A full-on linguistic UFO. Currently, around 24 authentic Rongorongo tablets are known to exist, scattered across museums and private collections. Some are small, others about the size of a modern tablet or book. Most are inscribed on driftwood or local timber, using obsidian or shark tooth blades. The symbols are arranged in lines written in a style called reverse boustrophedon, meaning the reader would scan left to right on one line, then flip the tablet 180 degrees and read the next line upside down. Already, that's advanced. That's not doodling, that's writing. But here's the tragedy. When missionaries arrived, they forbade the locals from practicing their old traditions. The island's elite class, the Ariki, and their scribes were wiped out by disease, colonialism, and cultural erasure. By the time linguists tried to study the script, no one alive could read it anymore. The key was lost. And so, Rongorongo has become the linguistic Rosetta Stone that never got its stone. A code with no crib. A ghost language with no living speakers. Attempts to decipher it have ranged from rigorous academic efforts to the fringes of pseudoscience. Some scholars believe the script is mnemonica, kind of ritual memory aid, used to recite genealogies, chants, or myths. Others think it's proto-writing, more symbolic than grammatical. Still others are convinced it was a full-blown writing system, capable of recording complex thought, history, and governance. In 1995, linguist Stephen Fisher claimed to have cracked the code, suggesting the script was used to record creation myths and lunar calendars. But his conclusions were controversial, and most experts remain skeptical. There's simply not enough surviving material to analyze parallel texts, no bilingual inscriptions, no equivalent to a Polynesian Rosetta. And so, the debate rages on. What's maddening is how close we might be. Some of the glyphs clearly repeat. Some resemble things we can identify: humans, birds, fish, stars. There's structure, rhythm, logic. But not enough to pin down syntax, grammar, or meaning. It's like listening to a song in a language you almost remember from childhood. Familiar, teasing, untranslatable. And then there's the question of origin. If Rongorongo was indeed a real writing system, and not just decorative art, it would be one of the few ever invented independently. Writing systems typically spread through cultural diffusion. Sumerian cuneiform influenced Akkadian, which influenced Ugaritic, and so on. But if Rongorongo sprang up in total isolation on one of the world's most remote islands? That's huge. It would mean the people of Easter Island didn't just build giant statues. They built an intellectual culture. One capable of abstract thought, symbolic logic, and linguistic sophistication, all without outside influence. And that opens the floodgates of wonder. What else did they know? What stories were lost with the last of the scribes? What wisdom was buried with the final tablet, burned during colonization, or eaten by salt and time? Some believe Rongorongo holds the key to understanding how the island's society collapsed. Others think it might record the island's genealogical history, or even astronomical knowledge. A few dreamers whisper that it contains the true history of the Moai, those stone faces whose origins are still debated. But most of all, Rongorongo reminds us that knowledge is fragile. That entire languages can vanish in a generation. That writing, the hallmark of civilization, can disappear more easily than we care to admit. That we are always one lost scribe away from forgetting who we are. And if that doesn't keep you up at night, consider this. Right now, somewhere in a drawer or attic or private collection, there might be another Rongorongo tablet. One more fragment, one more clue, the final piece that could decode it all. But until then, the tablets sit in their cases, behind glass, under museum lights, silent, waiting. And speaking of lonely symbols carved in unexpected places, the next mystery is a giant etched into a desert hillside, visible only from the sea or the sky. A trident, a tree, a candelabra, or maybe a beacon. Time to follow the lines of the Paracas candelabra. The Paracas candelabra, Peru. Carved into the arid hillside of the Paracas Peninsula on Peru's Pacific coast is a giant, mind-bending geoglyph that has haunted sailors, baffled archaeologists, and ignited the imaginations of everyone from ancient astronaut theorists to practical jokers. It's called the Paracas Candelabra 600, foot Longyou 200, foot with E design etched into the face of the hill, visible from miles out at sea and high in the sky, yet entirely invisible up close. And nobody knows what it is, or who made it, or why. Let's start with the obvious. It's not a candelabra. At least, not in any traditional sense. That name was slapped onto it by Spanish explorers who saw its trident-like shape and reached for the closest Catholic metaphor. 3 prongs. Central spine. Flickers of religious imagery. But once you see it from above or from a boat skimming the Pacific, you realize this is something else entirely. The design is carved nearly 2 feet deep into hardened volcanic soil. No dye, no pigment. Just the removal of a darker surface layer to reveal the lighter sand underneath an inverse canvas made with nothing but subtraction. It's a technique similar to that used in the nearby Nazca lines, but there's a key difference. The Paracas Candelabra sits on a steep hill, not a flat desert plain. And yet it has endured. Wind, rain, erosion, and earthquakes have barely touched it for over 2,000 years. That's right. Carbon dating of nearby pottery suggests the geoglyph dates back to around 200 BCE, possibly even earlier. This aligns it with the Paracas culture, a pre-Inca civilization known for its advanced textiles, skull surgeries, and elongated cranial modifications. But even among Paracas sites, this thing is an outlier. There are no other geoglyphs like it nearby. No inscriptions, no associated temples. Just this massive symbol carved into a hillside, facing the sea. So, what does it mean? That's the trillion-dollar question. Let's explore the theories. Theory 1. Navigational beacon. The simplest explanation, and the most popular among archaeologists, that the candelabra was a landmark for sailors. Visible from up to 12 miles offshore, it could have functioned as a kind of primitive lighthouse or directional marker, guiding seafarers along the dangerous Peruvian coast. Plausible, yes, but that only shifts the mystery. If it was a beacon, then who carved it? Why this shape? Why this hill? Why something so enormous, when smaller markers would have sufficed? Theory 2. Religious symbolism. Some believe the figure represents the staff of Viracocha, a powerful Andean creator god who predated the Inca. The staff symbolizing creation, control, and cosmic authority fits neatly with the trident-like design. Perhaps the candelabra was a divine signpost, a territorial boundary between the mortal world and the divine. But again, why carve it on a hill? Why face it toward the ocean? Theory 3. Psychedelic cactus. Here's where it gets weird. Some researchers argue the shape mirrors the San Pedro cactusa hallucinogenic plant used in ancient Andean rituals. The cactus branches into 3 arms, much like the candelabra, and was known for inducing visions and spiritual journeys. If the Paracas people used it ceremonially, perhaps the symbol served as a gateway, a psychedelic signpost, an invitation to enter altered states. But even if that's true, why would you advertise your mind-altering plant to ships? Theory 4. Astronomical marker. Others suggest the candelabra is aligned with specific celestial events, solstices, equinoxes, star risings. Some believe it points toward the Southern Cross constellation, which would have been a navigational aid for ancient mariners. Alignments are tempting, but without accompanying markers, temples, or written records, it's impossible to confirm. Theory 5. Alien runway, ancient airport. And of course, it wouldn't be a geoglyph without an alien theory. Some claim the Paracas Candelabra is a landing guide for ancient astronauts, a runway beacon to signal starships. It's large, clear from the air, and uniquely placed. Like the Nazca lines, it seems designed for viewers who can fly. Mainstream science rejects this, naturally. But that doesn't stop the whispers. And here's the thing, even if you throw out the wild theories, even if you accept the most grounded interpretation that it's a navigational aid, it's still weird. Because it didn't need to be this massive, or this precise, or this durable. Some group made the decision to create a monumental, cryptic image on a barren hillside where no one on foot could ever see it. Which means it wasn't made for people walking by. It was made for the sky. And that single fact transforms the entire site, from a dusty hill in Peru to a question mark the size of a football field. Who were they trying to signal? What were they trying to say? And why do we keep seeing the same patterns, lines, symbols, stone markers across cultures that never met, on continents separated by oceans? The Paracas candelabra remains a quiet enigma, etched in the sand, staring out at the endless Pacific. Unanswered, unexplainable, unmoved. And speaking of controversial signs of ancient contact, the next mystery is even stranger, because it doesn't live in the New World or the Old. It lives in a small town in Massachusetts, and it might be proof that medieval Europeans reached America centuries before Columbus. Behold, the Westford Night. The Westford Night, Massachusetts, USA. In the sleepy town of Westford, Massachusetts, where Revolutionary War markers and colonial homesteads speak of a young American nationalese, something far older, stranger. Carved into a glacial rock on a roadside hill is a faint figure. At first glance, it could be mistaken for graffiti. Erosion, a natural groove. But under closer inspection, it appears to be a knight, complete with a sword, and a shield, and a legend that could rewrite the history of the New World. This is the Westford Night, a medieval enigma in New England. And if the claims around it are true, it's not just a carving, it's a grave marker for a fallen 14th century European nobleman in America. Let's be clear, this isn't a statue or relief. It's a shallow, weathered engraving on a granite slab. The figure is rudimentary, outlined by chisel marks that have faded over time. It's hard to see unless it's been chalked, and it doesn't exactly scream high medieval art. But advocates of its authenticity argue that it's too specific and too detailed to be natural. And if it's real, it tells a story that sounds like historical fan fiction. According to legend, in 1398, almost a century before Columbus, Prince Henry Sinclair of Scotland led an expedition across the Atlantic. Inspired by Norse sagas, Sinclair allegedly sailed from the Orkney Islands, landed in Nova Scotia, and made his way down the eastern seaboard of North America. He was accompanied by a group of knights, including a man named Sir James Gunn. The Westford Night, so the story goes, marks the grave of Sir James Gunn, who died during the expedition. His fellow knights, following a tradition dating back to the Crusades, memorialized him with a carving. Sword down in reverence, shield at his side, laid to rest on foreign soil. A European knight in the forests of Massachusetts. Sounds crazy, right? But there's more. In the late 19th and early 20th centuries, local historians began documenting the carving. Some claimed to see a Templar-style cross. Others pointed to a sword-like groove. In the 1950s, a man named William Goodwin amplified the theory, linking it to Templar lore, hidden knowledge, and pre-Columbian transatlantic voyages. By the 1970s, the Westford Night had entered full-blown historical conspiracy territory. Advocates began seeing not just a knight, but a coat of arms, a battle map, even coded messages. The site became a pilgrimage for fringe historians and secret history buffs alike. Mainstream scholars? Not impressed. Most archaeologists dismiss the carving as a case of pareidolia, seeing patterns in random rock markings. They argue the sword is just a glacial groove, the shield is wishful thinking, the cross is a natural fissure. And the supposed figure? An illusion shaped more by belief than by evidence. No written records, no confirmed artifacts, no secondary signs of a 14th century Scottish expedition, just one rock. And a lot of imagination. But here's the thing, the legend won't die. Because the Westford Night taps into something deep in the American subconscious. The idea that the history we were taught, Columbus, 1492, blank slate wilderness, might be a lie. That others came first. That brave, forgotten souls once walked these forests and left behind messages carved in stone. It also connects to a larger pattern. From the Kensington runestone in Minnesota to the Newport Tower in Rhode Island, the idea of pre-Columbian European presence in North America continues to spark debate. Some of it's clearly bunk. Some of it isn't so easy to dismiss. And the Westford Night sits right on that fault line. Is it a hoax? A coincidence? A message from a time we refuse to see? Or is it something more? Because even if the carving is just a natural formation, someone in the 19th century believed it meant something. Someone gave it a narrative. Someone linked it to a legend that, true or not, carries mythic power. And maybe that's the point. The Westford Night isn't just about whether Sir James Gunn died in Massachusetts. It's about the hunger for buried truths. The need to believe that history is still being written and that sometimes the smallest clue can lead to the biggest story. And speaking of clues carved in stone, the next mystery takes us to ancient Rome, a funerary urn filled not just with ashes, but with riddles, images that defy explanation. A scene that seems to depict something esoteric, symbolic, maybe even forbidden. Let's open the Lovatelli urn. The Lovatelli urn, Rome, Italy. In the heart of Rome, where the layers of history stack like sediment beneath cobblestone streets, ancient artifacts are as common as espresso bars. But every so often, one of those relics stares back, challenges you, refuses to be pinned down. The Lovatelli urn is one of those. A funerary urn made of marble, found in the late 19th century in the columbarium of the Statilii Familia, to noble Roman house. This urn didn't make headlines for its craftsmanship, or even for its age. It made headlines because no one can agree on what the hell it's depicting. Let's set the stage. On the outside of the urn is a high-relief scene carved with surgical precision. It features a central male figure, flanked by robed attendants. There are symbols, vessels, serpents, a mysterious circular object. There's a large cloth being draped or pulled aside. And perhaps strangest of all, there's a ladder ascending toward a kind of veiled arch or gate. To some, it's mythological. To others, it's ritualistic. To a very vocal fringe, it's proof of a lost, ancient mystery religion. Let's break down the leading interpretations. Theory 1. Orphic or Dionysian rite. One common academic theory is that the urn depicts a ritual from the Orphic or Dionysian mystery, cult-secretive religious movements in ancient Rome that emphasized personal salvation, ecstatic experience, and rebirth. The man in the center could be an initiate undergoing a rite of passage. The latter might represent a symbolic ascent to divine knowledge. The vessels could be sacred libations. The drapery might be a veil between world's life and death, ignorance and enlightenment. This interpretation aligns with what we know of Roman mystery cults. Theatrical, symbolic, visually encoded, they didn't write doctrines, they carved secrets. But not everyone's convinced. Theory 2. Apotheosis of a noble Roman. Another reading suggests the urn depicts the deceased's apotheosis, his ascent to the divine after death. The latter is literal, not metaphorical. The veil is the boundary between mortal life and divine immortality. This would be in line with the Stoic Roman obsession with virtue and elevation. But if that's true, then why the snakes? Why the sacred vessels? Why the eerie lack of traditional funerary symbols? Theory 3. Mithraic or Hermetic iconography. Now we're getting esoteric. Some scholars and amateur historians believe the Lovatelli urn depicts a Mithraic initiation, a multi-stage process that involved symbolic death, rebirth, and the overcoming of cosmic forces. In Mithraism, the soul ascends through planetary spheres after death, each governed by a deity or daemon. The latter could represent these stages. Others suggest Hermetic influences the teachings attributed to Hermes Trismegistus, blending Greek philosophy with Egyptian mysticism. The circular object, a symbol of eternity; the veil, the illusion of the material world; the urn as a whole, a metaphysical manual carved in marble. But there's a problem. There's no text, no label, no instruction manual. Just this urn, sitting in the National Roman Museum, smirking silently at every attempt to decode it. Theory 4. Alchemical allegory. This is where the fringe takes over. Some researchers, particularly those in the esoteric or occult traditions, claim the Lovatelli urn is an alchemical tableau. The figures represent stages of transmutation, the purification of base matter, death, the unveiling of spiritual truth, the drape, and the final ascension, the ladder. The circular object could represent the philosopher's stone, the vessels, the sacred elements. Wild? Maybe. But alchemy was more philosophy than chemistry in the ancient world. It was symbolic transformation. And the Romans were no strangers to encoding big ideas in small spaces. Which brings us to the real mystery. Why go through all this effort for a funeral urn? Why fill its surface with riddles rather than praise for the dead? Unless the urn isn't about the deceased at all. Unless it's a message, a puzzle, a relic of a belief system that lived in the shadows, spoke in symbols, and survived through secrecy. Because the Lovatelli urn doesn't just depict something, it performs it. It is the veil, the ladder, the passage from ignorance to knowledge if only you could read it. And that's what makes it so haunting. Not that it resists interpretation, but that it invites so many. It's a microcosm of Roman spiritual anxiety, a philosophical question mark carved in stone. And like all great mysteries, it leads us to wonder, how many other symbols have we lost? How many other messages are locked in stone, waiting for the right eyes? And speaking of giant, cryptic messages written across the land, our next mystery isn't hidden in a museum. It's carved into the earth itself. A zodiac so large it spans miles, so old its creators are unknown, and so weird, some say it's a cosmic map. Welcome to the Landscape Zodiac of Glastonbury. The Landscape Zodiac, Glastonbury, England. Glastonbury is no stranger to myth. This tiny English town is soaked in legend. It's supposedly the final resting place of King Arthur and Guinevere. It's where Joseph of Arimathea allegedly arrived bearing the Holy Grail. It's a pilgrimage site for druids, mystics, hippies, and, occasionally, confused tourists looking for a music festival. But beyond the abbey ruins and New Age bookshops lies a far stranger claymone that stretches across miles of countryside and defies every conventional definition of archaeology. It's called the Glastonbury Landscape Zodiac. And if it's real, it means the land itself is a star map. Not metaphorically. Literally. Let's rewind to 1935. British artist and mystic Catherine Maltwood was studying Arthurian legends and tracing their geographic connections in the Somerset countryside. As she pored over old maps and aerial photos, she began to see something strange. Shapes. Not random ones, recognizable ones. A lion, a bull, a man, a scorpion, all traced in the contours of the land hedgerows, rivers, roads, and hilltops forming figures that match the 12 signs of the zodiac. Maltwood believed these shapes were no coincidence. She proposed that the entire landscape of Glastonbury was intentionally designed like a giant celestial mirror by ancient people thousands of years ago. The figures formed a 10-mile-wide astrological map, each aligned to its corresponding constellation. She called it the Temple of the Stars, and for some, it was a revelation. Each zodiac sign supposedly correlates to a geographic area. Leo is a lion formed by paths, lanes, and streams northwest of Glastonbury. Taurus is a bull whose horn traces are found near Butley. Gemini is a pair of figures along the roads of King's Sedgemoor. Aquarius appears as a figure pouring, a stream literally, into the landscape. The idea was that prehistoric astronomer priests walked these paths, celebrated cosmic events, and enacted celestial rituals in tune with the heavens. That the landscape was a sacred calendar, a star chart carved into the earth, visible only to those who knew how to read it. Mainstream archaeology? Not exactly on board. To most scholars, the Glastonbury zodiac is a classic case of pareidolia, human tendency to see meaningful patterns in random data. Fields, roads, and rivers are chaotic. People impose order on them. Draw constellations where none exist. Critics point out that many of the lines and shapes Maltwood identified didn't exist until medieval or modern times. Some of the so-called boundaries are drainage ditches, 19th century hedgerows, or even paved roads built long after the Iron Age. In other words, the zodiac may have been drawn after the stars, not before. But here's the rub. Even if the zodiac wasn't carved by prehistoric hands, the idea won't die, because it feels ancient. It taps into something primal, that longing to map the heavens onto the earth, to find meaning in terrain, to walk where the stars shine down in perfect symmetry. And Glastonbury is the perfect stage for this kind of myth. The Tortha town's famous hill, crowned with a medieval tower, has long been associated with Avalon. Sacred springs bubble nearby, rumored to have healing powers. The town's history is a tapestry of Christian mysticism, Celtic paganism, and UFO-level speculation. In that context, the landscape zodiac isn't just a theory, it's a belief system. Modern mystics still walk the signs, performing ceremonies, meditations, and seasonal rites along the paths of Taurus or Sagittarius. Dowsers claim the land vibrates differently in each zodiacal area. Astrologers swear the energy aligns with cosmic transits. For them, it's not about proving the zodiac exists, it's about living it. And here's where the story takes a turn. Because even if the Glastonbury zodiac wasn't designed in prehistory, even if it's a 20th century projection onto a random landscape, it's become real in another way. It's shaped how people experience the land. It's transformed ordinary geography into mythic territory. It's made fields sacred. That's the real power of belief. Not in proving a theory, but in living like it matters. The Glastonbury zodiac may never get academic validation, but it doesn't need it. It's a living mystery, shaped by those who choose to walk it. And maybe, just maybe, that's what ancient mysteries are for, not to be solved, but to be experienced. And speaking of ancient experiences written in stone, let's fly south to an island covered with towers, not castles, not forts, something stranger, something older. Built in the Bronze Age, and still standing, thousands of them watching silently from the hillsides. Prepare to enter the enigma of the Nuraghe structures of Sardinia. The Nuraghe structures, Sardinia, Italy, scattered across the rugged, sun-bleached landscape of Sardinia, are more than 7,000 stone towers, ancient and enigmatic, rising from the earth like fossilized giants. Some stand alone, others in clusters. Many are crumbling, overtaken by scrub and silence. But a few remain formidable massive stone beacons that have stood for over 3,500 years. These are the nuraghe, plural. Nuraghi, the legacy of a civilization that left no written records, only stone. And no one knows exactly what they were for. Let's start with the basics. The Nuragic civilization flourished in Sardinia from about 1800 BCE until the Roman conquest in 238 BCE. It was a society that built in basalt and granite, often with breathtaking precision. The Nurag themselves vary in size and complexity. Some are simple conical towers with a single chamber. Others, like the fortress of Sunuraxi di Baruminiare, sprawling, multi-towered complexes, complete with defensive walls, wells, courtyards, and even staircases spiraling up into the shadows. But none of them come with instructions. There's no equivalent of cuneiform tablets or Egyptian reliefs. No epic poems, no temple inscriptions. Just stonedry, heavy, and relentlessly mute. So, naturally, theories bloom. Theory 1. Defensive fortresses. The most popular academic theory is that Nuraghi were fortification stone bastions where people could retreat during tribal warfare. Their thick walls, narrow windows, and elevated entrances support this idea. Some are built on hills, overlooking fertile valleys, a perfect position for defense. But here's the problem. Many Nuraghi are built in places that make no strategic sense. On flat plains, near marshes, even tucked in between hills where visibility is limited. Not exactly prime real estate for a watchtower. So maybe defense wasn't the point. Theory 2. Residences of the elite. Some researchers suggest the Nuraghi were the homes of Sardinia's ancient ruling class, that the people who controlled trade, herds, or land lived in these stone towers as status symbols, castles before castles. But these towers are incredibly impractical as homes. They're cold, dark, and largely feature single, round rooms with vaulted ceilings. There's little evidence of daily domestic activity inside. No kitchens, no storage, no bedding. Which leads to the next theory. Theory 3. Temples and ritual centers. Could the Nuraghi have been religious structures? Some are aligned with astronomical phenomena. One Nuraghe entrance faces the rising sun at the summer solstice. Others seem oriented towards star constellations, particularly Oriona, recurring motif in ancient sky cults. Perhaps the towers were temples to the sky gods, or calendars carved in stone. There's also evidence of water cults. Nearby sacred wells, linked to the Nuragic culture, suggest a fascination with the underworld and the divine feminine. Could the Nuraghi have marked points of ritual pilgrimage? Maybe. But again, no writing, no symbols, just educated guesses. Theory 4. Megalithic communication network. Now we're getting bold. Some theorists have mapped Nuraghi locations and discovered patterns, sightlines, geometric alignments. The idea is that these towers formed an interconnected grid, a kind of Bronze Age communication or signal network. Fire beacons? Horn calls? Mirror flashes? Maybe. And if true, it suggests a level of coordination and territorial organization far beyond what's usually attributed to Bronze Age island societies. Theory 5. Something else entirely. Then there's the wildcard theory, that the Nuraghi are remnants of a lost Mediterranean civilization known that predates the Phoenicians, the Mycenaeans, and the Etruscans. That Sardinia was a hub of a forgotten cultural complex, wiped out by war, disease, or natural catastrophe, leaving behind only towers and legends. It sounds extreme, until you realize we don't know who built them. We don't know why they stopped. We don't even have a word for them from that time. Nurag is a modern term, possibly derived from a Sardinian root for heap of stones. And yet these heaps are breathtaking. The masonry is dry stacked, No mortar. Blocks are carved to fit together perfectly, some weighing several tons. In the most advanced sites, corbelled domes rise up like inverted beehives, still standing after thousands of years. You don't do that unless you care deeply about permanence. And here's the creepiest part. In many places, nuraghi are deliberately hidden, buried under later construction, built around, ignored. There are likely thousands more under the soil and scrub, undiscovered. A whole architecture of silence. So who were the nuragic people? They weren't isolated. Trade goods from the eastern Mediterranean, North Africa, and Iberia have been found in nuragic sites. They had contact, influence, knowledge. They buried their dead in giant megalithic tombs called giants' graves, suggesting a complex spiritual or ancestral belief system. And yet, when the nuragic age ended, it ended without a whisper. No collapse, no war, just absorption. The Romans arrived. The towers became curiosities. The civilization that built them faded into the background of empire. But the stones remain. Today, the nurag structures stand as sentinels of lost purpose, as symbols of a people who built in silence, thought in symbols, and trusted that their stone would speak when they no longer could. And maybe it still can.